Hello everyone, I'm the storyteller, and today I'll take you on a spooky story. But don't worry, it will be a gentle and relaxing journey before you drift off to sleep. If you're looking for a tale that's just mysterious enough and gentle enough to relax to, then you've come to the right place. Now find yourself a comfortable space. Close your eyes and let the story begin. Story 1: Creeping Silence. The storm began like any other. At first, just a whisper on the wind, a promise of rain that could have been mistaken for a distant murmur. But by the time the first crack of thunder tore through the sky, I knew this one was different. I always knew it's been like this since I was a kid. There's something about the way the air shifts, how the world around me seems to hold its breath before the sky breaks. I wasn't particularly fond of the thunder when I was younger, or the lightning, or the way the rain would lash against the windows. The house would groan under the pressure, and I'd hear strange creaks in the walls that I couldn't quite explain. But as I grew older, something about it changed. The storm became my solace, the only time I could truly feel at peace. It was like the world outside understood the noise in my head, the unease that always simmered beneath the surface. And in the chaos of the storm, I found calm. Lying in bed, I could hear the storm gathering strength, the wind picking up, rattling the windows. I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders, the rhythmic sound of rain on the roof, soothing me, drawing me further into that half-dreaming state. I was used to it by now, the way the rain would tap against the glass in a hypnotic pattern, how the lightning would flash in the distance, painting the room in momentary glimpses of stark white. It was my routine, my ritual. I closed my eyes, breathing deeply, letting the noise of the storm wash over me. The sound of the rain was like a lullaby, a memory taking me back to the days when the world seemed simpler, before life got complicated, before everything changed. But tonight was different. Something felt wrong, and I couldn't shake it. Maybe it was the way the wind howled louder than usual, or the deep, guttural growls of thunder that seemed to rattle the very foundation of my apartment. I don't know. But the peacefulness I usually felt was slipping away, replaced by an odd sense of unease. I turned my head on the pillow, trying to focus on the rain again. But then I heard it. A creak. At first I thought it was the house settling. The place was old, the kind of apartment that had the charm of a vintage building, but also the quirks, the sounds that it made when it was tired, when it was caught between ages. But this wasn't the usual groan of the floorboards or the pipes shifting behind the walls. No, this was something more deliberate. I opened my eyes, staring into the dark of the room, the only light coming from the occasional flash of lightning outside. My pulse quickened, and I fought the urge to sit up. Another creak. This one was followed by a soft, almost imperceptible knock. It was coming from the living room. I wasn't sure if I'd heard it correctly. My mind was playing tricks on me. I thought it was just the wind, or maybe the rain was getting heavier, making the house react in strange ways. But then I heard it again, a soft tap followed by a series of creaks, as if something or someone was moving through the apartment. I froze. There was no one else here. I'd made sure of it. I'd made sure of everything, but the sounds continued, growing louder, more insistent. I reached out my hand, groping in the dark, for the knife I kept on the nightstand. The cold steel of the handle gave me a slight sense of comfort. But it wasn't enough to erase the nagging feeling in my chest, the growing sense of dread that had settled deep in my stomach. I slid out of bed, careful not to make a sound, and crept toward the door. The apartment was quiet now, save for the storm outside. The wind still howling against the windows, the rain still pounding relentlessly against the glass. The living room was empty, just shadows stretching across the floor. The dim light from the storm revealing nothing out of the ordinary, but the sounds they had stopped. I glanced around the room, trying to shake the sense that something was off. I had lived here for years now, and I had never felt this way before. It was supposed to be safe. It was supposed to be my place of calm. I checked the kitchen, the hallway, even the bathroom. No one was here, but the feeling lingered, that heavy, suffocating presence, as if something were just out of sight, waiting for me to acknowledge it. I couldn't shake it. I made my way back to the living room, the knife still gripped tightly in my hand. My heart was pounding in my ears now, louder than the storm, and my thoughts were scattered, fragmented. I needed to make sure everything was in place. Everything had to be in its proper order. I paused in the doorway, my gaze falling on the dining table. The unfinished cup of tea that I had left earlier that evening had gone. I blinked. I was sure I'd left it there, half drunk, the steam still rising from the liquid as the storm had begun. But it was gone. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I told myself it was nothing, that maybe I had moved it or forgotten. But the nagging thought wouldn't leave. I started checking the rest of the apartment, my mind racing. I went into the guest room next, the one I barely used anymore. The door was closed, just like I had left it, or was it? I stepped closer, and my heart skipped a beat. The door was slightly ajar. I hadn't opened it. I knew I hadn't. I gripped the knife tighter and pushed the door open. The room was dark, save for the flash of lightning that cast fleeting shadows across the walls. Everything was in its usual place. Books stacked on the desk, the chair neatly pushed against the corner. But there, just by the closet door, something caught my eye. A stir stick. It was the one I had used to stir my tea. Earlier, the one I had left on the table. I bent down to pick it up, my fingers trembling as I touched it. It must have fallen. I told myself. Just a mistake, but then I noticed the closet door. It was slightly open, and I was certain, absolutely certain, that I had locked it. I had locked it. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment I just stood there, staring at the gap between the door and the frame. It felt wrong. It felt personal, like someone had been inside, someone who knew exactly what they were doing, someone who had been waiting. I stepped forward slowly, cautiously, and grabbed the handle. My pulse hammered in my ears. Inside the closet was empty, but the feeling didn't go away. I locked the door again, my hands shaking, and backed out of the room. My mind was reeling. There had to be a rational explanation. There had to be. I moved through the apartment, double-checking every lock, every window, every corner. But as I did, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The storm outside continued to rage, and I wondered if it would ever end. I couldn't shake it. The feeling that something was wrong, that something was out of place in the apartment gnawed at me. I tried to ignore it, telling myself that it was just the storm, the way it stirred up old memories and feelings, making everything seem a little too vivid, a little too real. But I knew better. Something was wrong, and I was alone in it. I sat in the living room, the same spot where I had started earlier that evening, watching the rain pour down outside. the lightning flashing in jagged streaks across the sky. The storm had picked up intensity, the wind now howling like a living thing, battering against the windows. It was one of those storms where the air feels thick, pressing down on everything as if the world itself is holding its breath. I couldn't focus on the rain anymore. The rhythmic tapping against the windows, which usually calmed me, now only seemed to amplify the disquiet in my mind. I was hyper-aware of every sound. The creak of the floorboards beneath my feet, the soft hum of the refrigerator, the way the walls seemed to breathe, along with the storm. My eyes flicked nervously around the room, but everything was as it should be. The same furniture, the same clutter, the same shadows stretching across the walls, but the unease lingered. I couldn't stop thinking about the guest room, about the closet door I had locked only a few minutes ago. Why had I felt compelled to check it again? What had made me so sure that something wasn't right, even when there was no evidence of it? The stir stick from my tea. The missing cup, was that just a coincidence, or was something more sinister at play? I stood up, pacing the apartment, trying to distract myself. The storm was so loud now that it seemed to drown out all other noise, but my mind was louder. I could feel it spinning, racing with thoughts and half-formed ideas. I grabbed my phone off the coffee table, checking the time. It was late, later than I realized. I needed to calm down. I tried to remind myself of how I used to feel during storms, how I used to curl up in bed as a kid. The sound of the rain a comfort, the thunder a lullaby. But now, it felt like the walls were closing in. The sense of being watched, of something being just beyond my reach, wouldn't go away. I glanced at the door leading to the hallway. It was still closed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just the storm that had made it so quiet in here. It was too quiet, too still. I walked over to the door, my hand brushing against the handle, and I hesitated. The apartment was small, only a couple of rooms, a living area, a kitchen, and the guest room. If someone had been here, I would have noticed by now. The place was too confined for anyone to hide, yet the feeling of being watched refused to dissipate. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway, my footsteps muffled against the hardwood floor. The storm outside seemed louder now, its roar filling the narrow space, and for a moment I stood still, listening. The wind screeched through the cracks in the windows, the rain beating against the glass like an urgent message. Nothing. But then I heard it, a soft scraping noise, almost imperceptible, coming from the guest room. It wasn't loud enough to be footsteps, but it was enough to make my skin prickle. I stood frozen for a second, my breath catching in my throat. I wanted to dismiss it, to tell myself it was just another sound created by the storm, but it felt different. This was something that didn't belong. I moved slowly toward the guest room, the floor creaking under my weight. My hand was still tight around the knife, though I wasn't sure what I thought I would do with it. The fear in my chest had a kind of urgency to it now, like something was about to happen, something that I wouldn't be able to stop. I reached the door, staring at it for a long moment, my pulse quickening. The crack between the door and the frame was barely visible, but it was there. The door had definitely been shut when I left it, but now it was open. Just slightly. My stomach twisted. I pushed the door open a little further, wincing as it scraped against the frame. The room was dark, the shadows deepening with each flash of lightning, but everything appeared normal at first glance. The bed was still made, the desk still cluttered with papers. I hadn't bothered to clean up the bookshelves full of forgotten novels. But as I stepped inside, I felt this shift in the air. Something was wrong. I walked toward the closet door, eyes scanning the room, but I could already feel the weight of it pressing down on me. The closet, it stood out now, somehow more imposing than the rest of the room. I couldn't help it. I turned the handle. The door opened with a low groan, and I peered inside. Empty, I stepped inside, my feet brushing against the carpet. There was nothing out of the ordinary, no sign of anyone. The same clothes hung neatly in the corner, the same cluttered shelves, but the moment I glanced at the floor, I froze. The stir stick, it was there again, near the base of the door, just as I had seen it earlier. But this time, it was unmistakable. It had been moved. I bent down to pick it up, my fingers brushing against the cool plastic. It was hard to tell if it was the same one, but it didn't matter. It shouldn't have been there that much. I was certain of. My mind raced. I was sure I had locked the closet. I was sure that I had left the room in perfect order. But this was a detail I couldn't ignore. I stepped back, the knife still clutched tightly in my hand, and locked the closet door once more. As I turned to leave the room, I noticed something else. A faint mark on the floor near the closet. A drag mark, as though something had been moved recently. But no one had been here. No one but me. I backed out of the room, my heart hammering in my chest. I wasn't sure what was happening anymore, whether I was losing my grip on reality, or if someone had been in my apartment, playing a twisted game. But as I walked back into the living room, the storm seemed to quiet for a moment, and in that silence, I heard it again. The soft scraping noise. This time, it wasn't from the guest room. It was coming from inside the walls. The scraping sound came again. This time, it was louder, more distinct, as if someone was dragging itself across the floor beneath the walls. It wasn't just my imagination. The noise was real. I stood frozen in the middle of the living room, staring at the walls as though they might open up and reveal some kind of hidden nightmare. The storm outside raged on the wind, screaming through the cracks in the windows. But it was that sound, that strange scraping noise, that kept my pulse racing, thudding in my ears like a drumbeat. I turned slowly, my eyes darting from corner to corner, half expecting to see something lurking in the shadows. The apartment, the same space I had always known, felt suddenly foreign. The walls that had once felt like a shield now seemed oppressive, closing in around me. My breath was shallow, my heart threatening to beat right out of my chest. I tried to move, but my legs were heavy. My mind screamed at me to leave the apartment, to run from the strange noises, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Something was keeping me here. I had to know what was happening, even if it meant confronting whatever was lurking in the dark. The scraping continued, now accompanied by a soft tapping, rhythmic and steady. I took a step toward the hallway, my body moving almost on instinct. The knife in my hand felt oddly comforting, though I had no idea what I was expecting to defend myself against. I reached the guest room door again. It stood slightly ajar, just as it had before, but now the space behind it seemed darker, deeper, as though the room itself was pulling me in, inviting me to step closer. I pushed the door open all the way. The room was still the same, yet it felt different, heavier, like it had been waiting for me to return. I didn't know what to expect. but part of me was hoping that everything would be normal again. That the strange feeling I had been carrying since the first knock would disappear. But there was something on the floor now. I didn't want to look at it, but my eyes betrayed me, drawing me in. The stir stick. It was there again, lying in the middle of the floor near the closet. But this time, it wasn't just the stir stick. It was the way it was positioned, almost as if it had been placed there, deliberately waiting for me. I stepped forward, my heart in my throat. My fingers trembled as I reached down to pick it up, but as I touched the stir stick, a chill ran up my spine. It wasn't just the coldness of the plastic. It was the feeling that something had been in this room watching me, waiting for me to see it. I stood up, the stir stick still in my hand, and looked around the room again. Something was off. There was an odd sense of stillness in the air, as if the room itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. My gaze shifted to the closet door. It was slightly ajar once more. I couldn't help it. I had to check, I had to be sure. I slowly approached the closet, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up as I reached for the handle. The door opened with a low, creaking groan, and I peered inside it. But the air inside the closet was thick with a presence that I couldn't explain. It felt wrong. My breath caught in my throat as I stepped back. I needed to lock the door again, to reassure myself that everything was as it should be. I reached to close the door, but as my hand touched the handle, a sound echoed through the apartment, faint at first like the wind blowing through the cracks in the walls. But then it grew louder, clearer, a whisper. I froze. It was just a murmur too soft to make out the words, but the sound itself sent a shiver down my spine. I looked around the room, my mind racing. Where was it coming from? The whisper came again, clearer this time though, still unintelligible. It was as though someone or something was standing just beyond my reach, speaking in a language I couldn't understand. My hands shook as I clutched the knife tighter, my pulse racing. I wanted to scream, to shout, to make the noise stop, but I couldn't. My voice was stuck in my throat. I backed out of the closet, keeping my eyes on the door as though it might open on its own at any moment. The whispering continued soft and insistent, almost like a lullaby. But it wasn't a lullaby. It was something much darker. I could feel it in my bones, in the pit of my stomach, that gnawing sense of dread that I couldn't shake. I stumbled backward into the guest room, my legs weak beneath me, and slammed the door shut. The whispering stopped. For a moment, the silence was deafening. The storm outside seemed to die down. Just a little, its fury waning. I was alone in the stillness. But it was the quiet that only made the fear feel more intense, more suffocating. The apartment had never felt this way before. This heavy, this charged with something I couldn't explain. I knew that something had changed. Something was in here with me. I turned to leave the room, but then I saw it. The closet door, barely ajar, stood in front of me like an invitation. I couldn't resist. I wanted to ignore it. I wanted to pretend that nothing had changed, that it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But the urge to check again, to make sure that everything was locked and in place, was overwhelming. I reached for the door again, my fingers trembling. The air in the room had thickened once more, heavier this time, and as I opened the door, I knew what I would find. Nothing. It was always nothing. Except this time, there was something else. Something I hadn't noticed before. A small piece of paper. It was tucked into the corner of the closet, just barely visible beneath the shelf. I bent down to retrieve it, my breath catching in my throat. The paper was folded crisp at the edges, like it had been there for a long time, waiting for me to find it. I opened it slowly, the words inside faint but clear. "I know you're here." I dropped the paper, my heart racing. My mouth went dry, and I felt a wave of nausea hit me. I stumbled backward, knocking into the closet door. The storm outside had intensified again, the wind howling with a new ferocity, but all I could hear now was the deafening beat of my own heart. Someone knew I was here. Someone was watching me, and I had no idea who or what they were. Story 2. Hand on the Glass. I've always hated storms. There's a deep, unshakable fear in the way the sky cracks open, like the world itself is about to rip apart. The wind howls, the trees sway, like they might snap in two, and the rain pelts against the windows with an almost vengeful force. But it's not just the chaos of the storm that terrifies me. It's something else, something I've never been able to explain. I've seen it since I was a child. The first time I remember noticing it, I was no older than 6. The storm had come out of nowhere, dark clouds swallowing the afternoon light, the wind picking up in a way that made the trees in our front yard look like they were reaching for something. I sat at the window in my bedroom, my little hands pressed against the cold glass, watching the sheets of rain blur everything into a smeared mess of gray. That's when I saw it. A figure, a dark, featureless shape, standing in the middle of the yard. I thought it was a trick of the storm at first, just a shadow maybe or something. My eyes were playing tricks on. But as the rain poured harder, the figure stayed, still unmoving. Watching, I blinked, rubbed my eyes, but when I opened them again, it was still there. I remember feeling a coldness spread through me, not from the chill in the air, but from something else, something I couldn't understand. I called for my mom, and she came in dismissing it with a soft laugh. "There's nothing there, sweetheart. It's just the storm messing with your eyes." I remember. Her voice was calm, reassuring, like it was just a passing worry. But it wasn't just that. Something about the figure, something about the way it didn't move, didn't even blink, made my stomach turn. I couldn't explain it, but I knew it was wrong, so I kept watching. Every storm since then, I'd wait for it. I'd sit by the window, hoping, almost desperate to understand why it was there. But every time it was the same, a black shape, unmoving, always in the same spot. Never any closer, but never any farther away either. And every time the fear would creep in, settling in the pit of my stomach like a heavy stone. As I grew older, I learned to ignore it, or at least pretend I had. I got used to the storms. I learned how to drown out the sound of the wind and the rain, to block out the tension in my muscles as I waited for the inevitable. But I never stopped seeing it. It was always there, like an old friend I hated but couldn't escape. The last time I saw it, I was 24. It was a late summer evening, and the storm had rolled in quickly, much like the ones I remembered as a child. I sat at my desk, papers scattered around me, as I tried to focus on the work I had to finish. My apartment was quiet, except for the low hum of the air conditioner and the sound of the storm building outside. Then came the flash. The bright, blinding light that split the sky in two, followed by the deafening crack of thunder that rattled the walls. It was so close, so violent that I flinched, my heart pounding in my chest. That's when I saw it again. At first, I didn't believe my eyes. I told myself it was just a storm playing tricks on me again, but when I leaned closer to the window, my heart sank. There it was, standing in the yard just like before. But this time it was closer, much closer. It was no longer across the yard, hidden by the heavy rain. Now it was right up against the fence. And it wasn't just a shadow anymore. There was something more, substantial about it, something that made the air feel heavier. The space around me colder. I froze. The breath in my chest caught. And for the first time in years, I felt the terror that had plagued my childhood flood back into me. My mind raced, trying to rationalize it. A man, maybe. Someone who had wandered into my yard just waiting for the storm to pass. But no. There was no way. Whoever or whatever it was didn't move. It didn't breathe. It just stood there watching me. I pulled away from the window, my heart beating faster than I could count. My phone buzzed in my hand, and I nearly dropped it in my panic. It was a text from Ali, my best friend since childhood powers out at my place. "Girls are fine though. Are you okay?" I stared at the message, blinking rapidly, trying to make sense of it. My mind was in a fog, a cloud of fear and confusion. There was something wrong, something I couldn't understand. I glanced back toward the window. The figure was still there, but now it was closer. Closer to the house, I could barely breathe. My hand shook as I typed a quick response to Ali. "I'm fine, just a storm. Stay safe," I hit, send, my eyes still locked on the figure. It was right at the window now, just a few feet away. My heart hammered in my chest, a sharp, painful rhythm that seemed to echo in the silence around me. Then, as if on cue, the storm intensified. The rain hammered the windows harder, and the wind howled so loud that I couldn't hear myself think. Lightning cracked again, and in that flash of blinding light I saw it. The figure was right at the glass now. A black shape, its outline distorted by the water on the window. But it wasn't just standing there anymore. It was reaching. I gasped, my body frozen in place. Its hand pressed against the glass. I could see the shape of it clearly now, long, thin fingers splayed against the window. It felt like time had stopped, like the entire world was holding its breath. My own breath caught in my throat, my pulse thundering in my ears. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. All I could do was stare at that hand, pressed flat against the glass, as the storm raged outside. Then the power cut out. Everything went black. The silence was deafening, the hum of the storm outside, the only sound. I stood there, my chest heaving as I tried to make sense of what I had just seen. My eyes scanned the room in the dark, and when I turned back to the window, the figure was gone, but the feeling lingered. That unease, the coldness in the air. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Something had shifted, and as I stood there frozen, I felt the faintest draft, like the back door had been opened. My stomach churned, and I stepped back from the window, my hands trembling as I reached for my phone to call Ali. But before I could dial, I froze again. The darkness outside felt too oppressive, too suffocating. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. All I could do was stand there, waiting for the storm to pass, and for whatever had been out there to finally leave me alone. The storm had passed, but the feeling of dread lingered like a thick fog curling around my chest, tightening with each breath I took. I sat in the dark, trying to steady my mind, trying to shake the image of the figure from my thoughts. But the more I thought about it, the less certain I became of what had happened. Had I imagined it? Had the storm simply played tricks on my mind? My hands were still trembling. my fingers aching from the grip I had on the edge of the windowsill. I knew I had to shake it off, but the fear wouldn't let go. I glanced at my phone. No new messages from Ali. She must have been busy dealing with the power outage at her house. The silence in my apartment felt suffocating, like the walls were closing in. The power was out, and with it the hum of life outside. The streets, usually busy with the distant murmur of traffic, were now eerily silent. No cars, no voices, just the endless, oppressive quiet of the storm's aftermath. I stood up, my legs unsteady beneath me. My body felt heavy, as if gravity had doubled in the span of a few minutes. I needed to get out of this house, out of this space that seemed to be closing in around me. I needed air. I grabbed my coat, pulled it on, and walked to the door. But as I passed the window again, my gaze was drawn to the yard. The moonlight barely penetrated the thick cloud cover, but I could still see the outlines of the trees and the fence. I hesitated. My heart raced. I couldn't stop myself from looking. Nothing. The yard was empty, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The stillness was drawn too perfect. It was as though the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. And then, in the distance, I thought I saw movement, just a shift of shadow by the fence. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt a chill sweep through me. I stepped back from the window, my pulse quickening. It had to be a trick of the light, it had to be. But deep down, a part of me knew that wasn't the case. That figure, that shadow, it had always been there, lurking just beyond the edges of my vision. But now, it felt closer than ever before. I needed answers, but where could I turn my mother? She'd always told me the same thing. There was nothing out there. A figment of my imagination, she said. You've always been afraid of storms, honey. It's just your mind playing tricks on you. But I knew it wasn't just my mind. It was real. Whatever it was real. And it was waiting for something. Waiting for me. I grabbed my phone again, my fingers trembling as I typed a quick message to Ali. I need to talk. Call me when you get a chance. I hit send, hoping that maybe she would have some insight. Maybe she could help me make sense of this, of everything that had been happening since I was a kid. I couldn't do it alone anymore. The minutes dragged by, each one heavier than the last, and the storm had left behind only the dampness and a lingering chill that made the air feel thick, oppressive. It felt like the world outside was holding its breath, waiting for something I wasn't ready to face. And yet a part of me felt compelled to return to that window, to confront it, to finally get the answers I so desperately needed. I forced myself to walk back to the window. I had to know. The fur gnawed at my insides, but I pushed it aside, focusing instead on the need to understand. I pressed my hands against the cool glass, my breath fogging up the surface as I leaned in closer. The yard was still empty. I waited for what felt like an eternity, my eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. And then, just as I thought it was over, just as I was about to turn away, I saw it. The same shape, the same darkness. But this time it wasn't still. This time it was moving. Not slowly, but with a purpose. The figure was approaching the house. I felt a tightness in my chest, a sense of panic rising in my throat. I wanted to call the police again, like I did years ago, when I was convinced it was real. But the memory of them dismissing me, telling me it was nothing but a trick of the light, still stung. No one would believe me. No one ever did. My fingers slid over the glass, and I tried to steady my breath. It was happening again. The shadow was coming closer, It was no longer standing still at the edge of the yard. It was near the porch now, moving with an unnatural precision as though it knew exactly where to go. And that's when I saw it, its hand reaching out, as if it were trying to touch the window. I froze. I couldn't tear my eyes away from it. I was paralyzed by fear. The figure's hand hovered just inches from the glass. Long fingers splayed wide. The air seemed to thicken around me, pressing and suffocating me with the weight of its presence. And then, just like that, the power flickered back on the light flooding the room with brightness. But when I looked back at the window, the figure was gone. Gone. But I didn't feel any relief. In fact, the silence that followed was worse. The storm had passed. The power was back, but the feeling of dread hung over me, thicker than ever. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty yard, waiting for the figure to return. But it didn't. The night was still too still. I walked to the back door almost against my will. My hand hovered over the knob, my fingers tingling, as if they knew something I didn't. Something was wrong. Something had happened and it wasn't over. I opened the door cautiously, the cool air rushing in, carrying the scent of rain-soaked earth with it. The yard was dark, quiet, too quiet. And then I heard it, a soft whisper, barely audible over the faint sound of the wind. At first, I thought it was just the wind itself, carrying voices from somewhere distant, but as I stepped outside, the whisper grew louder. It wasn't just one voice, it was many, low murmurs like a crowd of people speaking in unison, but there were no people. There was nothing but the empty yard, the rustling trees, and the darkness pressing in around me. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone, it was clear. It was a warning. I slammed the door shut behind me, my heart racing in my chest. I backed away from the door, my eyes darting to the windows, to every corner of the room. There was something out there. I didn't know what it was, but I couldn't ignore it anymore. I spent the next few days in a fog, unable to shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The storm had passed, but the unease never left. It clung to me like the dampness from the rain wrapping itself around my body, making everything feel heavy and unnatural. The memory of the figure of its hand pressed against the glass haunted me. But worse still was the whisper I had heard outside. The soft murmur, a chorus of voices I couldn't place, all speaking in unison as if they knew something. I didn't. It gnawed at me, this sense that something had shifted. Something was coming, and I was helpless to stop it. I had tried to push it all out of my mind, to go on with my life like any normal person would. But how could I? How could I go on when the same figure that had haunted my childhood was getting closer? I found myself staring out the window again, even when the skies were clear and the world was silent. Every gust of wind, every shadow that moved in the corner of my eye made me jump. I couldn't help myself. I had to know if it was still out there, but it never was. At least not when I was looking. I tried talking to Allie about it, but she didn't seem to understand. She was always the level-headed one, the one who could explain everything away with logic and reason. To her, everything was just a trick of the mind, a symptom of stress maybe, or my overactive imagination. I wanted to believe that I wanted so badly to believe that it was nothing more than a byproduct of my fear, my anxiety. But deep down I knew better. I remember one evening after a particularly restless night of tossing and turning, I decided to confront it. The figure, the mystery. I couldn't keep living like this, paranoid, afraid of every storm, every flash of lightning I needed. Answers I had to know what it wanted. It had been 2 weeks since that night, and the weather had been calm since then. Clear skies, no storms in sight. But that didn't matter anymore. I knew it wasn't about the storm. It was about me. It was always about me. So that night, as the clock struck midnight, I did something I had never done before. I went outside. I stood in the middle of the yard staring at the dark space in front of me, where the figure had always stood. The air was still, the ground damp beneath my feet from the earlier rain, and the moon was hidden behind thick clouds. I felt vulnerable, exposed. But there was no turning back now. I called out into the silence, my voice trembling with both fear and determination. "I'm not afraid of you anymore." There was no response. Only the sound of the wind rustling through the trees and the distant hum of city life in the far-off distance. "I want to know why you're here," I said, my voice gaining strength as I spoke. "What do you want from me?" I waited the silence, swallowing my words, suffocating them, nothing. But then, as if answering some unspoken question, the wind shifted. It was subtle at first, just a slight change in direction. The temperature dropped a few degrees, and for a moment I thought I saw something move in the shadows. Something tall, dark, and still. My heart skipped a beat, and I turned toward the spot where the figure had always appeared. My eyes strained against the darkness, searching for any sign of it. It was there. I couldn't see it clearly, not in the way I had before, but I felt it. I could feel its presence like a weight pressing down on me from all sides. I took a step forward, my breath shallow, my heart pounding in my chest. "I'm not afraid," I whispered, barely audible even to myself. I don't know why I said that. It wasn't true. I was terrified. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to run, to get away, but something inside of me, something primal, kept me rooted to the spot. The figure moved slowly, almost imperceptibly, but it moved. My pulse raced. I was frozen, my body refusing to obey the commands of my mind. It came closer until it was no longer a distant shape, but something standing, just a few feet away from me, looming in the darkness. I could feel it now. Its eyes, if it had eyes, were on me, watching, waiting. The air around me seemed to pulse thick with tension, thick with something else I couldn't name. A voice, faint but unmistakable, whispered from the shadows. "It's too late to turn back now." I stumbled backward, my breath catching in my throat. The voice was low, guttural, like it came from deep within the earth itself. I couldn't understand it. At first, couldn't make sense of the words, but then they hit me with a cold clarity. I wasn't supposed to be here. Whatever this thing was, whatever it represented, it had been waiting for me. Waiting for me to come to it. I turned and ran. I don't know how long I ran or how far I went. All I know is that when I finally stopped panting and gasping for breath, I found myself at the edge of the woods behind my house. The trees were tall and dark, their branches swaying gently in the wind, but the shadows between them seemed to stretch farther than they should have. They felt alive, like they were reaching out to pull me in. I heard the voice again this time. Not from the shadows, but from somewhere close, right behind me. "You can't escape." I whirled around, but there was no one there. Nothing but the trees and the night. I was alone. But I wasn't alone. I could feel it. Its presence, that oppressive weight, still hanging over me. The night stretched on in an endless void, the silence broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves and the soft hum of my own panicked breathing. The figure was gone, but the fear remained gnawing at my insides. making me question everything I thought I knew. I stumbled back home, my legs weak, my mind racing with the implications of what had just happened. It wasn't over. It couldn't be. Whatever this thing was, it had been waiting for me. It had been watching me for years. And now I had crossed the line. As I closed the door behind me, the feeling of being watched didn't go away. It followed me inside. It lingered like a shadow I couldn't shake. I knew then, with a certainty I couldn't ignore, that it would come again. And next time I wouldn't be able to run. I wasn't sure what it wanted from me, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't stop it. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop it. The figure was real, and it was coming for me. Story 3. The Ghost in the Mirror. I wasn't ready to be here, but then again, I don't think I was ever really ready to be anywhere without Anna. She was a force in my life, so sharp, so alive, and in the blink of an eye she was gone. They said it was an accident, that she had slipped off the rocks at the edge of the beach during a storm, unable to grasp the jagged cliffs in time. A cruel twist of fate, they said. But the way the waves had pulled her under that day, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than just nature's whim. Michael thought the house would help Anna's old beach house, the one she'd practically lived in, nestled at the edge of the cliffs. He said we needed to escape the reminders, the empty apartment in the city, the phone calls that never came, the space where Anna had once been. So we rented it for the summer. I didn't fight him on it. I barely fought him on anything anymore. The house wasn't anything special, not at first glance. White painted wood bleached by the salt and sun. A porch that looked out over the beach, endless and cold, with the ocean gnashing against the shore, in a way that almost sounded like a warning. Michael was already carrying our bags inside, unaware of the creeping unease that had started to crawl under my skin. He had always been good at ignoring the discomforts, even when they were right in front of him. I lingered at the front door, staring out at the horizon. The sea, the same sea that had claimed Anna. It seemed to be calling to me, or perhaps it was just the wind that carried the familiar scent of salt water and decay. The kind of decay that made your stomach turn, the kind that didn't belong in a memory. "Are you coming?" Elise Michael's voice startled me. Pulling me back to the house, I nodded and made my way inside, though every step felt heavier than the last. Inside, the air was thick with the remnants of Anna. Not her scent that had long since disappeared, but something else, something haunting. The faintest trace of perfume, of paper, of words unspoken. The house felt as if it had been frozen in time, as if no one had touched it since Anna had last been here. The furniture, the books, the old paintings on the walls. It was as if she was still alive in every corner of the room, watching and waiting. Michael was unpacking in the bedroom. He tried to act normal, but I could see it in his eyes. The same thing I felt. The unease, the guilt. He never spoke about it, but I knew that there was something between us now. A fracture, a silence that neither of us dared to break. The first night was restless. The sound of the ocean was louder here than it had ever been in the city. It felt like it was inside my head, crashing through my thoughts, drowning everything out. I kept thinking about Anna, how her laughter had once filled this house, how she had always been the one to bring life to this place. And now she was gone. The house felt so empty without her. At some point, I drifted off to sleep, but the dreams were strange. distorted eyes saw Anna's face, twisted in pain, as though she were reaching out to me. I tried to call her name, but no sound came from my lips. Then I woke up. The room was dark, but the faint light from the ocean outside leaked through the curtains, casting long, thin shadows across the floor. I sat up in bed, my heart racing. There was something different about the room now. I couldn't place it, but something was wrong. I felt it before I saw it. The mirror. It was an old framed mirror that had always hung in Anna's room. A small thing ornate with cracked edges that told of age and history. But now, as I glanced at it in the dim light, I swore the reflection wasn't mine. I leaned in closer, squinting, trying to make sense of it. There was a woman in the mirror. It wasn't me, not really. Her features were too soft, too familiar. She was dressed in an old faded dress, like something Anna might have worn in the summer years ago. Her hair was disheveled, wild in the reflection. Her face turned slightly away from me, but I could feel her eyes. Cold, empty, staring at me. I jerked away from the mirror, heart pounding in my chest. The room felt suddenly colder. My breath came in short, frantic gasps, and I turned to see if Michael had woken up. He lay beside me, still and oblivious. I tried to calm my breathing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I glanced back at the mirror. It was empty. Just my reflection, now standing alone in the darkness. The next day, Michael suggested we take a walk along the beach. I agreed, though. The thought of it made my stomach twist. But we needed to get out to breathe, to do something other than sit in the house drowning in memories. We walked in silence, the sand cold beneath our feet. I saw something last night, I said finally, breaking the silence. Michael turned to me, his brow furrowing. What a woman! In the mirror. It wasn't me, it wasn't. I trailed off, unsure of how to explain it. He shook his head as if trying to dismiss my words. You're probably just dreaming, Elise. It's just the house, it's old, it's the stress. We've been through a lot. I wanted to believe him, I really did. But something in my gut told me it wasn't that simple. The days dragged on. I couldn't stop thinking about the mirror, about the woman I had seen, about Anna. And then one morning, a letter arrived. It was postmarked from New York, and the handwriting on the front was unfamiliar. I tore it open, my hands trembling, and as I read the words, something inside me shifted. Dear Elise, I don't know how to begin this, but I have to tell you, I was Anna's boyfriend once back in college. You probably don't remember me. I've been trying to find you. There's so much I need to say, so much that I never told her. Please, if you can. I need to talk to you. I need closure. I froze. My heart skipped a beat. Wallace. I hadn't heard that name in years, but the more I read, the more I could feel the connection. The pain. The loss. Wallace needed closure. But so did I. We both did. And that was the moment I knew Anna wasn't just gone. She was still here, pulling us both towards something. Something neither of us were prepared for. The letter from Wallace had lingered on my mind for days. I couldn't stop thinking about it. The ink of his words bleeding into my thoughts like water soaking into dry earth. I need closure. How could I provide him with that? How could anyone, especially someone who had never even met him, offer a piece of finality when we were all still left hanging in the same void? Michael had tried to dismiss it as he had everything else. He didn't understand, not the depth of my grief, not the way Anna's presence had started to seep into this house like a shadow, too persistent to ignore. I think he was just afraid of losing me, of me getting lost in the past. But the truth was, it wasn't just the past I was drowning in. It was the here and now. I stood in front of the mirror again that night. The one Anna had once admired herself in with careless ease. It was no longer a simple reflection. It was a portal, a veil between two worlds. As I stared at my own face, the dim light from the ocean's reflection flickering across the glass, I saw her again. Not Anna in the physical sense, but in the flicker of the glass. Her eyes wide and desperate, staring back at me. "Stop it," I whispered, my voice barely a breath in the room. She's gone, but that didn't stop the vision. Her face twisted in agony, her mouth opening as if to scream. Though no sound came, a chill ran through me. The sea outside raged in response, the wind whipping harder against the walls of the house. It felt as if she were begging me to do something, to acknowledge her. But what could I possibly do? How could I give her the peace she needed when I couldn't even give myself peace? My hands trembled as I picked up the letter again. The ink seemed to blur in front of my eyes, as if the words themselves were trying to escape. I could feel Wallace's presence in the paper, his pain pressing against me, suffocating me. I couldn't ignore it any longer. I had to respond. I had to reach out. For Anna, for myself, for him. I sat down at the old wooden desk in the corner of the room, the surface cold and worn, as though it had weathered decades of secrets. I opened the drawer, fumbling for a pen, and in the dim light of the room, I began to write. "Dear Wallace, I don't know why I'm writing you. Maybe it's because, like you, I feel as though I am still trying to find Anna, even though she's gone. I don't remember you, not really. Anna never spoke of you, but I've heard your name in the scattered conversations we had in the past. She kept a part of herself locked away from the world. Maybe she kept you locked away too. I need to know about Anna's life before New York, before she came to me. Perhaps that's the only way either of us will find some kind of closure. Elise." I reread the words, unsure of what I hoped to achieve by sending them. I had no reason to believe Wallace would answer me. After all, he had already sent 2 letters, and who was I to think that a third would bring anything new? But there was something about this house, this place, that felt as if it were pushing me to confront the past. Not just Anna's past, but my own. I sealed the letter in an envelope, the act of doing so feeling like a ritual. The wind outside howled through the trees, and for a moment I thought I heard something, a voice on the breeze, soft but clear. My heart skipped Elise. I shook my head, trying to clear the sudden dizziness that overwhelmed me. I wasn't imagining things. The wind had not carried a voice. I had merely thought I had heard it. But when I turned toward the window, something caught my eye, a shadow moving across the sand. I stared, unblinking, my pulse racing, as I watched the figure move near the cliffs. It was a man small against the vastness of the beach, walking slowly toward the edge. The moonlight cast long, stretched shadows over his form, but I could see his every step, the way he moved, as though searching for something. My breath caught in my throat. Was it him, Wallace? I had to know. I grabbed the letter, stuffed it into my jacket pocket, and hurried out the door. The cold night air hit me like a slap, but I didn't stop. I didn't even think. The sound of the ocean crashing against the rocks was deafening now, as if the world itself were trying to drown me, to swallow me whole. The figure grew clearer, more defined. The closer I got, it was him. It had to be. I could feel it in my bones. "Wallace," I called out, my voice wavering in the wind. The figure paused but did not turn around. I approached cautiously, my heart thudding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. The sea roared behind me, the wind so strong that it felt as if it could pull me away, take me with it. "Wallace?" I called again, louder this time. The man stopped slowly, his shoulders shifted, and he turned toward me. His face was shadowed, but I could make out the features sharp, angular. He looked as though he had been waiting for me. "Are you Wallace?" My voice broke slightly. My words felt hollow against the backdrop of the storm. He didn't speak for a moment. He simply stood there, his face unreadable. And then finally he nodded. "Yes?" He said, his voice hoarse, as if it had been too long since he had spoken to anyone. "I've been waiting for you," I froze. There was a strange feeling in the air now, something heavy and oppressive. As I stood there on the cliff, I could hear the faintest echo of a woman's laughter in the distance. It was soft too, soft to be real, yet unmistakable. Wallace took a step toward me, his face haunted, desperate. "You don't understand, do you?" "She never told you, did she?" "Who?" I asked, barely able to get the words out. My throat had gone dry. "Anna," his voice dropped to a whisper. "She never told you about me, about us." And with that, everything in me shifted. The letters, the ghostly image in the mirror, the sudden chill in the air. It all became clear. I wasn't just here to grieve. I was here to uncover something. Something I was not ready to face. But as the shadows around us lengthened and the sea whispered against the cliffs, I knew there was no turning back now. The days blurred together. I couldn't remember whether it was morning or evening, only that the sky always seemed to be overcast, heavy with a tension I couldn't shake. The ocean, distant yet omnipresent, continued its ceaseless roar, a reminder that it was always there, just like Anna, always there. Waiting, watching, her presence seemed to grow with each passing hour. I had tried to push Wallace from my mind. After our strange meeting on the cliffs, I had tried to pretend that his words, his pain were just another intrusion into my already shattered world. But how could I? He was the key to understanding her life, to unraveling the secrets that had been buried beneath the years of her friendship with me. The letter he had sent, the one I had replied to, weighed heavily in my thoughts. "She never told you about me." About us, his words echoed like a taunt, as though he knew something I didn't, something important. The house had begun to feel like a tomb, cold and oppressive, despite the warmth of the summer sun outside. I couldn't escape the weight of it. I couldn't escape the mirrors, the silent reflections that seemed to reach for me in the dark. Every time I walked past one, Anna's face seemed to watch me from the glass. Her eyes filled with sorrow, her mouth twisted in a painful grimace, as if trying to scream, but no sound came. It was on the third day after Wallace's visit that I found the second letter from him. It came just as I was beginning to feel some semblance of normalcy again. Michael was out for a walk along the beach, giving me the quiet I had longed for, and I had sat down in the living room, my back to the window, reading an old book I had brought from the city. Then there it was, an envelope on the table. The handwriting was unmistakable. Wallace's hurried, desperate scrawl. I almost didn't open it. I should have just burned it. Let it be the last of his intrusion into my fragile peace. But my hand betrayed me. The envelope tore open with a single rip, and I unfolded the paper inside. "Elise, I know it's been a while, but I can't stop thinking about what you said, about Anna's life before New York. There's so much you don't know, so much she kept from you. I need to tell you what happened between us before she left for the city, before everything fell apart. I need you to understand why she did what she did. I think it will make sense of everything for both of us. I'll be waiting. Wallace. My heart pounded as I read those words. The rawness of his need for closure was palpable, like an open wound. He wasn't just looking for answers, he was seeking absolution. But what did he think I could give him? What could I possibly say? The more I read, the more my mind raced, flashing with images of Anna. The Anna I had known, the carefree wild woman who had captivated everyone she met, but also the Anna who had pushed people away when they got too close. I set the letter down slowly, my fingers trembling. Wallace's words gnawed at me, pulling me towards something I wasn't ready to confront. I needed to know, needed to understand why Anna had kept this secret from me. But at the same time, I feared what I might uncover. Would it change everything I thought I knew about her, about myself? My mind spiraled as I thought of Anna's life before New York, before she had become my anchor, my closest friend. I had no idea what had come before that. She had always been so distant when it came to her past, always skirting around it, deflecting questions with that mischievous smile of hers. I should have pressed her harder. I should have demanded answers when I had the chance. But I hadn't. And now it was too late. I stood up abruptly, my heart racing. The room felt suffocating. The air thick with grief pressed down on me. I had to do something. I couldn't just sit here, trapped in my own thoughts. I left the house and walked to the beach. The sand was cold beneath my bare feet, the waves crashing harshly against the shore. The wind howled, carrying the salt water scent with it stinging my eyes. I didn't know what I was searching for: answers, peace, or perhaps just a moment to escape from the relentless pull of my own grief. I walked along the water's edge, the waves licking at my ankles, the coldness of the ocean seeping into my skin. The world was so empty out here. The endless expanse of water seemed to stretch into oblivion. And for a moment, I wondered if I would just keep walking, let the sea swallow me whole. But then I heard it, a voice faint but unmistakable. Elise. I stopped dead in my tracks, my breath catching in my throat. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't my imagination. The voice was real. I spun around, my heart pounding in my chest. There was no one there. Only the darkened beach stretching out behind me, empty except for the occasional shadow of a seagull gliding above. I turned back toward the ocean, trying to steady my breath, my heart still racing. The voice was gone, but the feeling it left behind lingered. It was the same sensation I had felt back at the house, that nagging, suffocating presence. I walked back to the house, my thoughts a jumbled mess. I couldn't make sense of it. The house was the same, quiet still. Except it wasn't. There was something off about it now, something I couldn't put into words. The walls seemed to close in on me, and I could almost feel her again. Anna watching me, waiting. I didn't even bother to change out of my wet clothes. I just went straight to the desk where Wallace's letter still lay waiting. I picked it up again, rereading it, hoping to find something I had missed. But as I did, I felt the presence again. Closer now, stronger. I turned my head slowly toward the mirror, half expecting to see her. And I wasn't disappointed. There she was, not in the reflection, but standing right behind me. Her pale face, her dark eyes filled with accusation, just as they had been in the reflection before. "You're not ready for the truth," she whispered. Her voice was thin, like a thread of smoke curling around my consciousness. You never were. The words cut through me like ice. I turned quickly, but the room was empty. There was no one there. My breath came in shallow gasps. I stared at the empty space behind me, my pulse hammering in my ears. The reflection in the mirror was my own, but for a fleeting moment I had seen her. I had seen Anna. I was losing myself, losing my grip on reality. The lines between what was real and what wasn't were starting to blur, and I didn't know how much longer I could hold on. I stumbled back away from the mirror, my heart racing. I had to get out. I had to leave, but I couldn't. The house had already claimed me. And with every letter, with every vision, I was sinking deeper into something I couldn't escape. I was no longer sure what I was searching for. Only that I couldn't stop. I couldn't stop until I understood. But maybe in the end, I would wish I had never started. Story 4. Deleted Existence. I've always thought I had a normal life, at least that's what I used to believe. Normal isn't the word I would use to describe it anymore, though. My name's Alex, and everything feels wrong. It started small at first, like something you can ignore, a shadow flickering at the edge of your vision. But I can't ignore it anymore. Not when it's this glaring. I can't pretend anymore. This morning as I sat down to drink my coffee, something seemed off. My reflection in the kitchen window wasn't mine, at least not completely. Sure, the face looked like mine, the sharp jawline and light brown hair, the same eyes that used to be so full of ambition. But something in my gaze was different, like a stranger had taken residence in my skull. It unsettled me. I brushed it off, thinking maybe it was just one of those mornings where the mind's too tired to keep up. But it stayed with me. That feeling, it lingered all day. It was around noon when I first noticed the gap in my memories. I was scrolling through my phone, looking for something to distract me. I opened up my photo gallery, expecting to see a series of familiar moments, birthday parties, vacations, dinner with friends. But as I swiped through, there was nothing at all from before the last few weeks. There should have been pictures from years ago, moments from high school, moments from my college graduation. But there were none, not even a single photo of my parents. In fact, I realized I couldn't even remember my parents' faces clearly anymore. They were vague, blurry figures, like I was trying to recall a dream that slipped further away with every passing second. I tried to ignore the pit growing in my stomach, telling myself it was just a glitch, an error in my phone. But deep down, I knew better. Something was wrong. I called my best friend Jay. He's the kind of guy who's always around the one who's seen you at your best and worst. He should know me better than anyone. If there was anyone I could trust to help make sense of this, it was Jay. But when I dialed his number, it went straight to voicemail. That was strange. Jay never turns his phone off. I dialed again and again, still no answer. I tried texting him. "Hey man, everything good?" No reply. That's when the panic really began to settle in. It was as if I were losing my grip on reality. A sinking feeling in my chest started to spread, and I couldn't shake the thought that something was erasing me bit by bit, memory by memory. I left my apartment and went to Jay's place. It wasn't far, just a couple of blocks away. He lived in a tall building, one of those new luxury apartments with floor-to-ceiling windows and minimalist interiors. I rang his doorbell. Nothing. I knocked. No answer. I even tried the spare key under the doormat, but it wasn't there. By this point, the sense of unease was overwhelming. So I decided to take a more drastic measure. I went downstairs to the building's lobby and approached the concierge, friendly older man. Mr. Grayson was behind the counter. As always, he greeted me with a smile. But when I asked if Jay had left or if he knew where he was, Mr. Grayson's face went pale. He hesitated for a long moment before answering his voice. "Unsteady, Jay," he said slowly as if the name wasn't registering. "There's no Jay in this building, sir." My mouth went dry. "What do you mean?" "I'm talking about Jay Cooper, the guy in apartment 203. You've seen him around, right?" The old man shook his head. "Sorry, son. I'm afraid there's no Jay Cooper here." I stared at him for a long moment, trying to process the words. Was he messing with me? But no. His eyes were wide with confusion and his hands trembled slightly as he fiddled with a pen on the counter. I didn't know what to do. I could feel the world narrowing around me, suffocating me in its oppressive stillness. I left the building, my mind racing. I needed to figure this out. I needed answers. So I went to the one place I thought I'd find something, any kind of clue. My childhood home. The streets outside had changed too. Familiar stores were gone. Landmarks were replaced with unfamiliar buildings. The road that used to lead to my parents' house was blocked off for construction. I had to take a detour, and when I finally reached the old neighborhood, something felt off. The house was still there, but it was different, slightly altered, like someone had tried to renovate the place, but didn't quite get it right. The mailbox was a different color. The garden in front, once meticulously maintained, was overgrown. I knocked on the door, hoping my parents would be inside, hoping to feel some semblance of normalcy. When the door opened, I found myself staring at a stranger, a woman in her mid-50s, who looked at me with a puzzled expression. "Yes," she asked. I blinked, my throat dry. Sorry, is this my house?" She gave me a strange look. "I'm afraid not." "You've got the wrong address, dear." I tried to explain, but she wasn't having it. "I don't know who you are," she said, stepping back and closing the door in my face. I stood there in disbelief. What the hell was happening? My mind was spinning, and my vision felt like it was caving in on itself. I didn't know where to go next, who to trust. Every step I took seemed to pull me further away from the life I thought I knew. When I finally gave up on that and went back to my apartment, I was greeted by the worst discovery of all. I sat down at my desk and Googled my own name. Alex, my last name. And what I found stopped my heart. There was an obituary, a recent one. 2 years ago, someone who looked exactly like me had died in a car accident. I wasn't dead, I couldn't be. But there it was in black and white. A person. With my face, my name, my age. Dead, I couldn't think. I couldn't breathe. How was this possible? How had I never seen this before? I needed to talk to Jay. I needed answers. I finally got him on the phone after hours of trying. His voice, when he picked up, was calm too. "Calm, Alex," he said, almost as if he'd been expecting my call. "I know what you found." "What the hell is going on, Jay? Why can't I remember anything? Why is everything disappearing?" My voice cracked, the tension in my chest unbearable. Alex J. said quietly, "You made a deal, but you don't need to know the details. You just need to stop asking questions." I felt my blood run cold. "A deal? What are you talking about?" "What deal?" "I don't stop asking," he warned, his voice tightening. "If you keep asking, it'll all go away. You'll be gone, and someone else will take your place. Just stop." I didn't understand, but the fear was creeping in now, seeping into my bones. I couldn't shake it. Was this the beginning of the infamy? What was happening to me? And then Jay's voice, lower now, almost a whisper. "I've warned you, Alex. Don't make the same mistake I did." The line went dead. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? How could anyone, knowing that their entire existence was a lie? Jay's words echoed in my mind over and over again. "Stop asking questions, Alex. If you keep asking, it'll all go away. You'll be gone, and someone else will take your place." The more I thought about it, the more my head spun, each thought colliding with the next in a chaotic spiral. What did Jay mean by that? What did he know? How could he know anything about something so impossible? My skin felt tight, like I was trapped in a body that wasn't my own. Was I already gone? Was I just some echo of someone else? A placeholder waiting to be erased again? I tried to shake off the dread, focusing on the task at hand. I had to understand what was happening to me. I couldn't just let this go. But every attempt to find an answer only led me deeper into this suffocating nightmare. I started the morning by researching my own name again. This time, I tried different variations. Alex, last name, Alex, my initials. Even an attempt at entering obscure parts of my history, like my childhood school name or the places I used to live. It didn't matter. It was like I had never existed. Frustration clawed at me. I tried calling my family's old number again, but it went straight to voicemail, like the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to realize the truth. There was no one to talk to. I couldn't reach anyone from my past. Then a message popped up on my phone. It was a text from Jay. "I told you to stop." I read it over and over, the words growing more sinister with each passing second. "I told you to stop." Who was he really? Was he just some friend who had somehow become twisted in this cycle? Or was he part of whatever this system was that was erasing me? The pit in my stomach deepened. I needed to get to the bottom of this. But how could I, when every lead I followed disappeared before I could reach it? The realization hit me all at once. Maybe Jay wasn't my friend at all. Maybe Jay had been part of this before too. Maybe he was just another version of someone who had gone through what I was experiencing now. He was a symptom of something larger, a keeper of some forgotten rule that was designed to keep us trapped. I couldn't trust him. Not anymore. I left my apartment again, determined to find something, anything, that could explain what was happening. I found myself standing outside the building, looking up at it. The glass windows caught the late morning sun, casting long, distorted reflections. I'd been here a million times, but now it felt like an alien place. A place that didn't remember me. I thought about the funeral. I'd seen the obituary with my face. It had been so real. How could it not be? I had seen the date 2 years ago. That was the first real confirmation that something was wrong, that I wasn't just imagining things. The wind blew cold, snapping me out of my thoughts. It didn't matter where I went anymore. The world felt like it was dissolving around me. I didn't have a place in it anymore. Not really. I walked down the street aimlessly, hoping that if I just kept moving, the pieces of my life would fall back into place. But the longer I walked, the more I noticed the cracks. People passed by, but no one acknowledged me. The city felt hollow, like a place populated by ghosts of memories that weren't mine. I came to a small cafe. I used to frequent a place where I had spent countless hours with friends talking about nothing and everything. The old woman behind the counter gave me a blank stare as I approached. She was the same woman who had worked there when I first started coming, but there was something different about her. Her smile was forced, her eyes too wide, like she was struggling to remember something. "Hi, it's me," I started, my voice trembling as I leaned over the counter. "Do you remember me? I used to come in here all the time, Alex." She stared at me for a moment, her brow furrowing, then shook her head. "Sorry, can't say that I do, son." I felt a cold shiver run through me. I've been coming here for years." "I'm afraid you've got the wrong place," she said curtly. "Now, are you going to order, or should I move on to the next customer?" It felt like the ground beneath me was shifting. I was starting to feel dizzy, detached from the world. Was it possible? Was I being erased from even the memories of those I had known? I left the cafe without a word. My legs were shaky, my mind unraveling. I had no one. No one remembered me. In a daze, I wandered through the city, not really knowing where I was going, just looking for something that could anchor me. The sun began to dip low, casting long shadows across the street, but it didn't feel like nightfall. It felt like time itself was being erased, a blank page being torn from existence. Then, as if the universe had a cruel sense of humor, I saw a familiar face, a woman. She was walking down the street carrying a shopping bag. She had dark hair, a familiar smile. I had seen her before somewhere. I couldn't place it. My memory was failing me again. But I knew I had seen her. "Excuse me," I called, walking toward her. She stopped, a confused look crossing her face as I approached. "Hi, I don't mean to bother you, but do I know you? Have we met?" I asked desperately, trying to place her in my past. She frowned slightly, tilting her head. "Sorry, I don't think so." Her voice was flat, almost dismissive. I stared at her, trying to find some spark of recognition in her eyes. "No, I'm sure I've seen you before. You used to live in the building on the corner, right?" She shook her head. "No, I've never lived there." I could feel the blood drain from my face as she turned and walked away, her steps quickening as if she wanted to put distance between us. I tried to follow her, but before I could catch up, she vanished into the crowd. It wasn't possible. There was no way this was real. I stood there for a long time, staring into the busy street, unable to comprehend what was happening to me. I had tried everything I could think of to make sense of this nightmare, but nothing was adding up. Every step forward felt like I was being pulled back, like I was sinking deeper into some vast hole that had no bottom. And then I realized, maybe Jay was right. Maybe I had already asked too many questions. Maybe there was no way out. I didn't know if I had the strength to keep going, but I couldn't stop now. If I did, I'd be erased, and I couldn't let that happen. Not yet. Not until I knew the truth. The world around me feels like it's slipping through my fingers, as if I'm no more than a figure in a fading photograph. And every time I try to grasp it, it crumbles, leaving only fragments behind. I should have listened to Jay. I should have stopped asking questions, but I couldn't. I couldn't let go of the urge to know the truth, even if it meant my destruction. But what's left of me if I stop? What am I if I let myself fade away without a fight? I couldn't sleep. It was impossible now. My eyes burned from staring at the same things for hours. Photos of people I didn't remember, places that felt foreign. My own name that felt like a lie. The past was a void, and everything I had believed and everything I had built was evaporating into thin air. I couldn't stay in my apartment anymore. It felt empty, like a shell. I was still trapped inside, but nothing inside it was mine. The walls were just empty containers for memories I no longer possessed. So I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside, trying to escape this suffocating sense of displacement. The city was as chaotic as always. Cars honking, people bustling, the hum of life moving in every direction. But it felt different to me. It wasn't real, not anymore. The streets seemed to twist and stretch, the buildings towering higher and higher, as though the world itself was closing in on me. Every face I passed felt unfamiliar, and yet I could have sworn I had seen them all before. The sensation was maddening. I needed to find someone who could remind me of who I was, someone who could give me a sense of reality in this void. The logical thing, of course, would be to call Jay, but I wasn't sure anymore if he was my friend or if he had ever been. He'd given me answers, but they didn't make any sense. I pulled out my phone. I needed to call someone. Anyone. I opened the contacts. There were names there, people I should have known. But when I tapped on them, the messages wouldn't send. The calls didn't go through. Everything I touched was as intangible as air. My phone felt like a dead weight in my hand. I dropped it onto the sidewalk in frustration, my fingers trembling. I could feel my mind starting to crack, the pressure of it all threatening to swallow me whole. I needed to talk to someone, but no one was there. No one could hear me. I needed answers. The question that had been gnawing at me since I first saw that obituary was now at the forefront of my thoughts. Who am I? I decided to confront Jay again. If he was the only one who seemed to know something about this, I had to face him. I had to demand answers. His apartment was as I remembered it. Modern, minimalist, sleek, but when I rang the doorbell, I was met with silence. My heart pounded as I knocked louder this time. Frantic, I stepped back and glanced up at the windows, but I couldn't see anything. I couldn't feel anything. The emptiness clawed at me again, like a phantom of what used to be. Something told me that even if Jay was inside, he wouldn't let me in. I dialed his number again. His voicemail picked up almost immediately, and I wanted to scream. This wasn't supposed to happen. He couldn't just disappear. But then I noticed something, a strange, almost imperceptible shift in the air around me. The light flickered. It wasn't just the overhead lamps in the hallway. It was the world itself. The street lamps outside seemed to buzz faintly. The air had become thicker, heavier, like a presence was pushing down on everything I turned. Scanning the surroundings when my eyes caught something across the street. A figure standing in the shadows. I couldn't make out the details, but something about the shape seemed wrong, like it didn't belong. I had to find out what it was. I crossed the street, each step heavier than the last, until I reached the alley where the figure stood. The dim light cast long shadows, and for a moment I thought I was imagining things. But then the figure moved, stepping out from the darkness and into the light. It was Jay. But it wasn't Jay. I couldn't explain it, but his eyes, they weren't the same. They were hollow, as if someone had reached inside his head and scooped out his soul. His face was familiar, but it didn't belong to him anymore. I froze. "You shouldn't have come here." Alex J's voice was flat detached. He spoke as if nothing had changed, but there was something strange about his tone. It wasn't the voice of the friend I had known. It was distant. "What's happening to me?" I demanded, stepping closer. Desperation thick in my throat. Why can't I remember anything? Why can't anyone remember me? Jay didn't answer. He just stared at me, with those vacant eyes, like he was waiting for something. I wanted to scream, to demand more, but the words wouldn't come. Something was stopping me. Something in the air around me, pushing against my chest, squeezing the breath out of me. "Stop asking," Jay said, and this time there was something else in his voice. A warning, an edge of finality. "No," I forced out, taking another step forward. "I'm not stopping. Tell me what's going on, Jay. You owe me that much." Jay's lips curled into a faint smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You don't understand, Alex. You've already asked too much. You've gone too far." Suddenly, the ground beneath me seemed to shift. My feet wavered like I was standing on something that wasn't solid. I looked around the world around me, warping, twisting. The lights flickered again, and then I heard it. A low hum, distant at first but growing louder. It was everywhere, vibrating through the pavement beneath my feet, through my bones. "Do you see it now?" Jay's voice was colder. "Do you understand why? You can't keep asking? If you do, this version of you, this reality will cease to exist." "No," I whispered, my voice trembling as the world seemed to fold in on itself. "Please, I don't want to disappear. I don't want to be forgotten." "You already are," Jay said softly. His voice was an echo, distant as if it were coming from somewhere far away. I opened my mouth to say something, but before the words could leave my lips, everything stopped. The noise, the hum, the weight of the world around me. All of it stopped. And then there was nothing, a void. For a split second, I thought I had been erased, disintegrated just as Jay had warned me. But then I felt it, a sensation, a shift in the fabric of reality itself. The world snapped back into place. But it wasn't the same world I had known. It was different. Empty. I was alone. No one remembered me. I was alone in a city that felt even more alien than before. And I knew deep down that I was gone. This was it. This was the end, but it wasn't the end. Not really. A new name appeared in my head. A new identity, Liam. I didn't know how I knew it, I didn't know who I was, but I knew the cycle had started again. The entity was waiting, and it had warned me. If I asked too many questions, I would be erased too. But something inside me, something deep and primal, refused to let go. I couldn't stop now. The cycle had begun again. Story 5. The Colors of Death. I don't know when it started, this pull, this strange invisible thread tightening in my chest. It feels like I'm being drawn into something, and yet I don't know what it is. It's as though my hand is moving on the canvas without my permission, guided by something other than myself. I used to think I was in control of my art. But lately, that feeling has slipped through my fingers. Like oil on water, impossible to grasp. I'm a painter. Or at least I was. I can hardly remember when painting used to bring me joy. The colors, the strokes, the freedom to create whatever I wanted. It used to be my escape. But now it feels more like a curse. My paintings are dark, disturbing and strangely alive. I thought I could ignore the subtle changes in my work at first, dismissing them as mere accidents. But now, I can't pretend anymore. It started innocently enough. I was working on a landscape, just a simple forest scene. Trees, a small clearing, a few scattered wildflowers. The kind of painting I've done 100 times before. It was supposed to be a reprieve from the anxiety gnawing at my edges, the uncertainty about where I was going in my life. It was meant to calm me, to bring peace. But I can't shake the feeling that the painting is changing. Slowly, when I look away, the image on the canvas seems to twist just enough to unsettle me. The forest clearing, a serene escape, began to darken the trees, growing twisted and knotted in ways that didn't make sense. It was subtle at first, but I knew, deep down, I knew that this wasn't right. One afternoon, after a long stretch of painting, I laid down for a nap. My eyelids heavy, I drifted into a light sleep. The world outside was muffled by the thick curtains of my small studio. I awoke to the sound of wind rattling the windows, and when I blinked, something was off. I felt it immediately. The air was colder, heavier. My heart raced as I looked at the painting still on its easel. The clearing I had painted now had a campfire in the middle, surrounded by twisted trees that loomed like jagged specters. There was a strange heat radiating from the canvas, as if the fire inside the painting had begun to burn. I froze. This wasn't my work. I hadn't painted a campfire. I hadn't even intended to. But there it was, so vivid, so real. My hands trembled as I reached out to touch it, feeling the warmth of the flames, despite knowing the painting itself was cold to the touch. "Anne, are you okay?" The voice of Susan, my closest friend, pulled me from my daze. She stood in the doorway, eyes wide with concern. She had always been the grounding force in my life, the one who kept me from spiraling too far into myself. I don't know," I whispered, staring at the fire in the painting, feeling its flames licking at my skin. "I don't remember painting that." She came over to me, her brow furrowing as she took in the strange image. "It's unsettling. Are you sure you're all right?" I nodded, but I wasn't. I was far from it. Susan gave me a tight smile, and for a moment, the unease I felt in the studio seemed to lift. But as the days passed, the feeling only deepened. That same sense of disorientation began creeping into my other works. The landscape of the lake was next. I had started the piece with good intentions, serene, peaceful. A quiet lake at dawn, the soft ripple of the water, catching the early light. It should have been a simple composition. Yet every time I looked at it, I felt a gnawing discomfort. The reflections in the water seemed wrong, as if the ripples were too sharp, too deliberate. It was then that the dreams started. I dreamt of the lake, but in my dream, something was different. Something had changed. The boat I had painted in the water was real now, drifting gently toward the shore. And as I watched, a hand emerged from the lake, pale and shaking. It reached toward me, its fingers curled in an unnatural way. I woke up gasping for air, drenched in sweat. My body felt like it had been pulled out of my own skin, as though I had been yanked from a deep, dark place. I didn't understand what was happening. How had my art crossed into my dreams so vividly? How had it invaded my thoughts in this way? The worst part was that it didn't stop there. 1 week later, Susan drowned in that very lake. It was an accident. They said a terrible accident. She had been swimming with friends, and something had gone wrong. She had slipped under the water and never come back up. But I knew in my heart, I knew I had painted it before it happened. I had seen it before it occurred. That hand reaching up from the depths, that was no coincidence. It was as if the lake in my painting had stolen her. It felt like the artwork had somehow foreshadowed her death, had twisted the world to align with its vision. I couldn't stop painting. I didn't want to. I had to know if the next piece would be as twisted as the last I felt. Like something was calling me, compelling me to complete my works, to give in to whatever force had a hold on me. But as the days stretched into weeks, I found myself slipping deeper into obsession. I could hardly leave my studio anymore. One night, I rented a small cabin by the lake. I thought it would help to get away from the city, from the constant noise and distractions. I thought it would give me the clarity I needed. But the moment I stepped inside, I felt a sense of foreboding. Something about the place felt wrong off in a way I couldn't describe. The storm came soon after. I had been painting all day, lost in the colors and shapes of the world outside when the rain began. At first it was just a gentle patter on the roof, but soon the wind picked up, howling through the trees and rattling the cabin's windows. The storm grew more violent, the sky flashing with violent bursts of light. But I couldn't stop. I was too close now, too deep in it. The latest painting I worked on was the cabin by the lake. I had painted it before I came here. But now, in the storm's fury, I couldn't help but feel like it was mocking me. The same cabin I had rented for peace here. It was being swallowed by the very storm outside. The lightning crashed, and for a brief moment I felt a sickening calm. My brush hovered over the canvas as I saw the painting begin to shift. The lightning splitting the sky above the cabin, and then it struck. The cabin in the painting was consumed by the storm. Just like the one outside, I stumbled back, breath caught in my throat. The air grew heavy with dread. I knew without a shadow of a doubt that this wasn't just art anymore. It was something more. The painting wasn't just reflecting the world, it was shaping it. As the power went out, I stood in the darkness, lit only by the flickering candlelight, staring at my creation. I don't know how much longer I'll be able to control this. How much longer I'll be able to stop myself from painting what's to come. But I fear it's too late for me to turn back now. The wind howled outside the cabin, the storm growing more violent with each passing hour. The trees swayed under its power, their branches scraping the windows like long bony fingers reaching for something they could never touch. The rain hammered against the roof in a relentless rhythm, a constant reminder that I was trapped here, trapped with my paintings, trapped with whatever dark force seemed to be controlling me. I should have left. I should have packed my bags, gotten in my car, and driven away from this place. But I didn't. I couldn't. The painting was calling me, and I knew that if I left now, I might never finish it. I didn't understand why. It was so important, but it was as if something deep inside me was telling me that I had to complete it, no matter the cost. The cabin had seemed like the perfect escape. I thought it would help me clear my head, give me space to breathe, a little peace, a little solitude. But the moment I stepped inside, I felt the weight of something watching me, something in the air that I couldn't quite place. It wasn't the cabin itself. I knew that. No, it was the painting. The damn painting, the one with the cabin by the lake. I glanced back at it, standing on the easel in the dim light of the flickering candle. The storm outside mirrored the chaos inside my mind. The brush strokes were sharp, jagged, almost frantic. The more I looked at it, the more I felt an unbearable pressure in my chest, as though the canvas itself was pushing against me, suffocating me with its presence. I had painted it too quickly, too recklessly. It had started with a simple idea. Just a cabin by a peaceful lake, a quiet place to escape the world. But now it was something else. The sky in the painting was dark, swirling with violent clouds, the water reflecting the storm, churning with hidden depths. And then there was the cabin. It was like it had been struck by the storm itself. A violent force, the way the lightning lit up the painting's surface in eerie flashes. I had painted the destruction of the very thing I had come here for my sanctuary. I shuddered. Was it just me? Or was the storm outside different? The wind was picking up, slamming against the cabin walls as if it were trying to break in. The power went out with a sudden sharp snap, plunging the room into darkness. My heart raced in the stillness that followed the only sound, now the howling wind outside and the faint crackle of the candle's flame. I couldn't stop looking at the painting. It felt like it was alive, like it was calling to me. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at it, unable to tear my eyes away. And then, with a sudden terrifying clarity, I understood what was happening. The painting wasn't just an image, it was a prophecy. A prediction of something yet to come. I had to finish it. I had to complete the painting. I wasn't sure when the change had started, but I knew now that it had been creeping in for days. Ever since I painted the forest clearing, the lake, everything had shifted. I had painted without realizing it, in a trance-like state as if something had taken control of my hands. It was like I wasn't even aware of what I was doing, only that I was compelled to paint, to create, to follow the vision that was taking shape before me. My pulse quickened. The urge to paint was overwhelming. My hand was already reaching for the brushes, my fingers trembling as I dipped them into the colors. I didn't even think about it. I just moved each stroke more frantic than the last. The cabin in the painting seemed to shift, to twist under my brush. The lines of the roof were no longer steady, but jagged, like the structure was collapsing. The windows, once inviting, now looked hollow, empty, like eyes staring into the void. And then, as if summoned by my desperation, the storm outside intensified. A deafening crack of thunder shook the cabin, followed by a blinding flash of lightning that lit up the room in a terrifying instant. I flinched, feeling the force of it deep in my bones. I stumbled back, my hand shaking as I stared at the painting. The cabin in the painting was on fire. The flames had erupted from the roof, licking at the sky in sharp, dangerous tongues of red and orange. The storm outside had collided with the scene on the canvas, the lightning splitting the sky above the burning cabin, as though it were no longer two separate worlds, but one. I gasped, my mind reeling. I was no longer in control. The painting, my painting, had become something far more sinister. It was as if it was no longer just a representation of the world, but a force of its own, a force that had the power to shape reality. I stepped back, my feet unsteady beneath me. The candle flickered in my hand, casting long, stretching shadows on the walls. It felt like the room was closing in on me, like the darkness was swallowing me whole. I was no longer just afraid of what was happening to the painting. I was terrified of what it might do next. I needed to stop. I needed to destroy the painting, to rid myself of this curse. But a voice inside me, quiet, insistent, whispered that I couldn't, that I was too far gone now, that I had to finish it. I collapsed to my knees, my head spinning. The storm outside raged, the wind howling like a beast trapped in the night. I could hear the rain slamming against the windows, the sound of it louder than my own thoughts. I was trapped in this place, in this nightmare of my own making. And then, just when I thought I might lose my grip on reality completely, I saw it. Through the rain, through the darkness, I saw the silhouette of the cabin outside, just beyond the window. For a split second, it was just a shape in the storm, nothing more than a shadow. But then, with a sickening lurch in my stomach, I saw it just like in the painting. The cabin was on fire. The flames danced through the windows, shooting out into the storm. Like a living thing, I could feel the heat on my skin. Even though the fire was miles away, I could smell the smoke, thick and acrid, filling the room, suffocating me. My mind couldn't process it. How could this be happening? How could the painting, a simple landscape, have this kind of power? I felt a surge of panic. I had to stop it. I had to destroy the painting before it destroyed everything. But it was too late. I was already too deep. The line between my art and reality had blurred, and I had no way of knowing where one ended and the other began. The fire burned in the distance, its reflection shimmering against the dark, churning lake. The storm outside raged like an unhinged beast, relentless and unforgiving. Yet in the quiet solitude of the cabin, my mind was trapped in a swirling chaos caught between the pool of the painting and the horrors it seemed to create with every brushstroke. I couldn't escape the images. They followed me, haunted me like shadows that stretched just out of reach. I had seen it before, hadn't I? The flames, the smoke, the destruction. I had painted it, and now, somehow, it was real. The cabin, the one I had come to in search of peace, was burning, consumed by the same violent storm I had captured on the canvas. And the worst part was that I had no idea if the fire outside was caused by the storm or if it was a consequence of the nightmare I had painted. I stood in front of the easel, my body trembling, the candle light flickering as if it too was caught in the storm's fury. The cabin in the painting glowed with an eerie light, the flames dancing across the canvas in a frenzy. The windows were dark, empty. The door stood ajar as if beckoning me to enter. But I knew better. I couldn't enter. Not anymore. Not after what had happened the last time I stepped into a painting. I backed away slowly, my legs unsteady beneath me. The air felt thick, suffocating, as if the walls of the cabin were closing in. The storm's fury outside only added to the tension inside me. I had to leave, I had to escape before the painting took even more from me. But there was nowhere to go. This place. This cabin was already a prison of my own making. I turned away from the painting, my heart racing in my chest. The truth hit me like a cold wave. I was no longer in control of my art. It was controlling me. Each stroke, each color, each scene, it all felt like it was leading me deeper into something I couldn't comprehend, something I was too afraid to face. The flashes of lightning outside illuminated the cabin for brief, horrifying moments, casting long shadows across the room. And with each flash, I saw something else. A figure standing by the window watching. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, a figment of my imagination. But then the figure moved, stepping closer to the window, its outline sharp and distinct against the stormy backdrop. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. My body stiffened with fear. I wasn't alone. I knew I should have run. I knew I should have found the door bolted out into the storm and never looked back, but something kept me rooted to the spot. A strange curiosity gnawed at me, a need to understand what was happening. Who was that figure, and why did it seem so familiar? I stepped cautiously toward the window, my hand trembling as I pulled back the curtain. The night outside was a blur of rain and wind, the world reduced to nothing more than shadows and flashes of light. There was no figure, no shape, just the storm. I let out a shaky breath, feeling the tension in my body begin to ease. It was nothing. Just my imagination. I turned away from the window. But before I could take a step, I heard it. A knock. At first it was soft, a mere tap against the door. But then it came again. Louder this time, more insistent. My heart skipped a beat, and I felt a cold sweat break out across my skin. The knock came once more, echoing through the cabin. Shaking the very walls, I had to answer it. I had no choice. My hand reached for the door handle, but before I could turn it, the door swung open on its own. Standing in the doorway was a man. He was tall, dressed in a dark, weathered coat, his face obscured by the shadow of his hood. He looked like he had stepped out of the storm itself, his figure drenched by the rain, his clothes clinging to his body like they were part of the storm. But it wasn't just his appearance that unsettled me. It was the way he looked at me, cold, empty eyes that seemed to pierce through me, as if he could see straight into my soul. There was something unnatural about him, something wrong, but I couldn't look away. "Anne," he said, his voice low and gravelly, "I've been looking for you." I stepped back, the words hanging in the air like smoke. How did he know my name? Who was he? Who are you? I managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. The man didn't answer right away. He stood there, unmoving, his gaze fixed on me as if waiting for something. It was then that I noticed something strange, something that made my stomach twist with fear. The edges of his coat were dripping with paint, not just any paint, but the same colors that I had used on the canvas. The deep red of the flames, the dark black of the storm, the green of the trees. It was as if he had stepped right out of the painting itself, as if he were a part of it. My heart pounded in my chest, and a cold chill ran down my spine. I stepped back, my legs unsteady, but the man didn't move. He simply stood there, waiting. "I'm here because you've called me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You created me. You made me real." The words didn't make sense. How could I have created him? I had no recollection of painting him, of imagining him, but somehow I knew it was true. The man before me, the one standing in the doorway, wasn't just a stranger. He was a part of the world. I had created a living manifestation of my own twisted imagination. The storm outside raged even harder. Now the wind shrieking through the trees like a living thing. I could feel it in my bones. The painting had crossed the line. It wasn't just a reflection of reality anymore. It was warping it, bending it to its will, and I was helpless to stop it. The man stepped forward, his face still hidden in shadow, and for a moment I thought he was going to reach out and touch me, but he didn't. Instead, he spoke again, his voice a dark, rasping whisper. "You're not done yet, Anne. You still have more to create." I stumbled backward, my heart racing. The man wasn't real. He couldn't be. But the paint on his coat was real. The fear was real, and the storm, the cabin, the flames, they were real too. I looked at the painting one last time, and for the first time, I saw it clearly. The cabin in the painting was no longer just a symbol of destruction. It was a warning. I had created something dangerous, and now it was coming for me. Story 6. The Silent Watcher. It's hard to explain how it feels when you know something's wrong, but you can't quite place it. You can feel it in your bones, the creeping chill that crawls up your spine in the dead of night just before everything starts to fall apart. It's a sensation you've had before, a feeling that stays with you long after the moment has passed, gnawing at you until the next time it comes. But that's the thing. There's always a next time. It's been years since I've thought about that day. The day I almost drowned. I was 10 years old, a stupid kid who thought I was invincible. The lake was calm, the kind of serene, peaceful stillness that tricks you into thinking you can let your guard down. But I learned that day that the water holds secrets and not all of them are kind. I remember the cold seeping into my skin as I went under the crushing pressure on my chest as my lungs screamed for air. The sensation of my limbs weakening until I was just a floating, fragile thing in that dark abyss. But then, just as I was about to give in, someone pulled me out. I didn't see their face, but I remember the way their hands gripped me, strong, cold, unfeeling, like they knew exactly what I needed, but nothing more. I've spent years trying to forget that moment, trying to convince myself that I was fine. But I've learned that you can't outrun your demons. They always find you, no matter how fast you run. That night I felt it again. The shadow. I had just returned to my apartment after another long, draining day. The city was quieter than usual. Maybe it was the storm on the way, or maybe it was just the endless weight of the world pressing down on everything. I don't know, I don't care. All I know is that I was tired. I was bone deep, tired, exhausted in a way that sleep wouldn't fix. The rain started just as I stepped through the door, tapping against the windows like tiny fingers. I leaned against the door for a moment, letting the silence settle in. Then I heard it, a faint tapping, like the soft patter of nails against wood. My heart skipped a beat. At first I thought it was just the storm, but then I realized it wasn't coming from the windows. It was coming from inside my apartment. The floorboards creaked, a low groan, echoing through the otherwise still room. I froze, a chill crawling up my neck. It couldn't be. It was impossible. That was the first time I'd heard it in years. The tapping continued, rhythmic, deliberate. It was as if something or someone was waiting, watching. I shook my head, trying to dismiss it. I was being paranoid. That's what I told myself over and over. I had moved away from my childhood home years ago, convinced that whatever haunted me back then had stayed behind. But deep down I knew better. The figure was still out there. I didn't want to go to the window. I didn't want to look outside. But I knew I had to. I didn't have a choice. Slowly, I walked across the room, each step echoing louder in the silence. My hand trembled as it reached for the blinds. I closed my eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. When I opened them, I saw it. A figure stood across the street, barely visible through the sheets of rain. It was too far to make out details, but I didn't need to. I could feel it. Feel its presence like an electric pulse in the air, the shadow. It was always the same, tall, motionless, blending into the darkness around it. Like it belonged there, but it was watching me. I could feel its eyes boring into me, cold and unblinking. My heart pounded in my chest, the fear creeping up my throat like bile. I pulled the blinds shut, but I couldn't escape the image of the figure. It was there, standing in the storm, waiting for what I didn't know and I didn't want to find out. The storm outside grew more intense, the wind howling through the cracks of my apartment. I tried to ignore the tapping, the soft, persistent noise that now seemed to come from every corner of the room, but it wasn't the rain this time. The noise was closer, too close. It was as if someone or something was moving inside the walls. My hands shook as I reached for my phone, dialing the only number I could think of. My brother. I hadn't spoken to him in months, but right now I needed someone to ground me, to tell me I wasn't losing my mind. It rang twice before he picked up, his voice groggy and disoriented. "Hello, it's me," I whispered, my voice trembling. "There's something's wrong. What do you mean?" His tone shifted, the concern cutting through the fog of sleep. "I saw it again," I said, barely able to get the words out. "The figure. It's here, I can feel it." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Are you sure? Maybe it's just the storm playing tricks on you." "No," I insisted. "It's real. It's not just the storm. It's been following me for years." Every time something bad happens, it shows up. I don't know what it wants, but it's here. Okay, calm down. Are you safe? Lock the doors. Don't open them for anyone. I hung up without another word, feeling a strange calm wash over me. The figure was still out there, but I wasn't alone anymore. I wasn't the scared little kid who nearly drowned in that lake. I wasn't going to let whatever this thing was control me, not again. But as I stood in the middle of the room, my heart still racing, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Something wasn't right. The water started to rise. I wasn't sure when it happened, but the sound of the water, the soft sloshing sound, began to fill the room. It wasn't much at first, just a faint puddle at the base of the door, but it grew slowly, deliberately. The water crept across the floor, pooling around my feet. It was cold, bitterly cold, and it seemed to be moving, as if the water itself was alive. I backed away, my pulse quickening. There was no way it could be happening. The pipes in this building weren't old enough to burst. I had checked earlier, but still the water crept closer, as if summoned by some unseen force. And in the dark, the figure across the street, was it closer now? I couldn't tell. But I knew it was there. Waiting, then the tap started again, only louder now. More urgent. My breath caught in my throat as I turned, glancing around the room. The walls felt like they were closing in. The air, thick with humidity, seemed to press down on me. Suddenly, I wasn't alone. The water was rising faster now, flooding the room, and there in the corner was the shadow. It was moving closer. Slowly, inexorably, I could hear it. The sound of something dragging itself through the water. My heart raced in panic as I turned to flee. But where could I go? The door was locked and the water was already up to my ankles. And then I heard it. A voice, low, cold, and unmistakable. You can't fight fate. I stumbled backward, my foot slipping in the rising water. I fell to the floor, the cold grip of the figure's presence seeping into my bones. I couldn't escape. Not this time. The storm outside raged harder now, as though the world itself was pushing against my sanity, testing how much I could take. I tried to convince myself it was just the wind, just the storm, that had brought everything to this boiling point. But the thing about fear is that it doesn't just happen once. It doesn't vanish after a storm or after you close the blinds. Fear lingers, settles in your skin, digs under your nails and waits. It waits for the perfect moment to show you how vulnerable you really are. I was staring at the corner of the room when I heard it again. A faint tap, tap, tap. As subtle as a whisper, but just loud enough to make the hairs on the back of my neck rise. I turned quickly, expecting to see something, anything, but there was nothing. The room was still the faint hum of the refrigerator, the only sound in the otherwise quiet apartment, but I knew it was there. It had to be. The figure had been following me for years. After all, I couldn't outrun it, and I couldn't hide from it. Wherever I went, it would be there, watching, waiting, and I had no idea why. I tried to push the thoughts out of my head. I tried to focus on anything but the noise. Anything but the sense that something was wrong. But as I sat on the couch, staring out at the pouring rain, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. My heart beat a little faster as the air in the room seemed to grow heavier, as though it were thick with something I couldn't see but could feel pressing against my chest. Then the lights went out. One moment, the room was bathed in a soft, comforting glow from the overhead light. The next, it was pitch dark. I froze, staring at the darkness. My breath caught in my throat. I tried to move, to reach for the lamp on the side table, but my hands felt numb. I couldn't make them work. My pulse quickened, panic starting to rise. "It's just the storm," I whispered to myself, but the words felt hollow. This had never happened before. The lights had never gone out like this. Not here, not in this apartment. I fumbled for my phone. The cold touch of the screen familiar as I unlocked it. The flashlight flickered on, casting an eerie glow around the room. The light shook in my hand as my heart pounded. I felt the tension in my muscles tighten. Something was wrong. Something was terribly wrong. That's when I saw it. A shadow moved across the floor, stretching long and thin beneath the doorframe. It was barely visible, a shifting outline in the corner of my vision, but I knew what it was. The figure I didn't want to look, didn't want to confirm what I already knew, but the light from my phone seemed to pull me toward the door. Slowly, as if in a trance, I stood up, stepping toward the hallway, toward the source of the movement. My breath was shallow, the air in the apartment thick with the smell of damp wood and rain-soaked earth. Another tap. Closer this time. My skin prickled as I forced myself to move. One foot in front of the other each step, sounding louder in the silence. I reached the door, my hand hovering over the knob. The cold metal felt alive beneath my fingers, vibrating with something I couldn't explain. I turned it. The door creaked open and I stepped into the hallway. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating nothing but the faint outline of the walls and the small, still figure standing at the far end of the hallway. It wasn't much, just a faint shadow, almost indistinguishable from the dark wood of the floor, but I saw it. I saw the outline of the figure. It wasn't moving. It wasn't doing anything really, but it was there, waiting like it had been for years. I swallowed hard the lump in my throat, making it hard to breathe. Every part of me screamed to run, to escape, to lock myself away, but my body refused to listen. Instead, I stepped forward. One step, and then another. Tap, 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 I froze. The sound was coming from the other side of the hallway, from the bathroom. I glanced quickly at the end of the hallway, my heart racing as my mind struggled to keep up with the horror creeping in at the edges of my thoughts. I turned back, looking at the bathroom door. Just a simple door with peeling paint and a brass handle, but now it seemed like a threshold, a portal to something worse, something that was already coming for me. The tap echoed again, louder now, as if someone knows something was tapping on the door from inside. It wasn't a normal sound. It wasn't a sound made by a person. The rhythm was too deliberate, too knowing, as if it had been practiced. I couldn't breathe. The door, was it moving? I couldn't tell. I took another step closer. The floor beneath me groaned as I moved, the old wood complaining under the weight of my footfalls. The flashlight flickered, casting shadows across the walls. The sound of water reached my ears, faint and distant, like a stream running through a narrow pipe. I reached for the handle, my fingers trembling as I touched it. It was cold, freezing, like the chill of a grave. I gripped it, my heart thudding in my chest. My mind screamed at me to stop, to turn around, but my body couldn't move. It was as if the house had grown still, like time itself had stopped moving. I twisted the handle. The door creaked open, revealing the bathroom. At first, everything seemed normal. The bathroom was just like any other, with cracked tiles and peeling wallpaper. The faucet dripped water collecting in the sink, the sound oddly comforting in the otherwise oppressive silence. But something wasn't right. The water on the floor, it was spreading. It wasn't much at first, just a few dark spots soaking into the old rug. But as I stepped further into the room, the water rose slowly, relentlessly. The pale blue of the bathroom tiles blurred as the water climbed the walls, and my stomach turned. I looked down. My feet were submerged now, the water rising higher with each passing second. I stepped back, but the water didn't stop. Something moved in it. It was then I heard the sound coming from the corner of the bathroom. It wasn't a tap this time, no. This was something different. A soft slithering sound, like fingers moving through the water. But the fingers weren't mine. I backed away, my flashlight trembling in my hand, as the water continued to rise around me, higher until it was up to my knees. I was trapped. The figure, the shadow was out there. It was closer now, moving through the dark, but I couldn't see it anymore. I could feel it though, crawling through the dark, waiting. Suddenly the flashlight flickered and died. The darkness rushed in, and then the voice. It was low, too low, coming from the dark, thick like the water itself. You can't fight fate. The words were familiar. Too familiar. The same words I had heard when I was drowning. I had never been able to escape them, and now, here they were again, pulling me under. The water was rising faster now, surging around me, swallowing me whole. I was drowning. And this time, there was no one to save me. I couldn't breathe. The cold water rushed over my skin, numbing me to the point where I couldn't feel my feet. My heart raced, each beat seeming to echo louder than the last until it drowned out everything. Until all I could hear was the thundering of my pulse. The flashlight flickered once more, its beam cutting through the dark like a weak candle trying to hold back the night. But it wasn't the darkness that terrified me. It was what lay beneath it. The water had risen so high that it now reached my waist, dark and murky. Swirling like a living thing, I couldn't see the bottom. I couldn't see anything in the blackness below the surface, but I could feel it. Something was down there. My eyes flicked to the mirror. My own reflection distorted by the greasy black sludge that had written the words on it earlier. You can't fight fate. I could feel the weight of those words pressing down on me. They had followed me from that lake, from that childhood nightmare. And now standing in this water, I was once again a helpless child, drowning, lost and at the mercy of something I couldn't control. But it wasn't just the water. It wasn't just the terror that gripped my chest as the darkness swallowed everything. There was something more. The figure, that dark presence, had always been in the background, lurking. But tonight it felt different. It wasn't just watching anymore. It was here, in this room, moving through the water, with a quiet, deliberate purpose. I tried to scream, but no sound escaped my throat. My mouth felt dry, like the air in the room had thickened, become suffocating. I stumbled backward, my legs caught in the rising water, but my body couldn't move fast enough. It was as if the water was pulling me down, as if it didn't want me to escape. I glanced around my eyes, scanning the bathroom in a frantic search for something, anything that could explain this. There was nothing. The water was rising, creeping across the tiles, as though the room was slowly being consumed by it, as if it were part of the house, now a living, breathing thing. Then I saw it. The shadow moved again, gliding across the bathroom, like a dark ripple in the water. It wasn't just the figure from across the street. This wasn't just a man, a shape, a shadow anymore. It was something more. The edges of the figure blurred and twisted, as if it were made of liquid itself, a part of the very darkness that surrounded me. It moved closer. I wanted to run, but my legs felt heavy. I wanted to scream, but the water choked me. I could feel it now. The weight of the figure, the oppressive presence pulling me into its grasp. I had no control. The fur was too overwhelming. The water was up to my chest now, and I could feel it pushing against me, trying to drown me. I gripped the sides of the tub, trying to hold on to something solid, but it was as if the bathroom itself was slipping away, turning into a deep, bottomless pit. The shadows closed in around me, and I could feel the figure moving closer. Closer still, I tried to look away, but I couldn't. I couldn't tear my eyes off it. It was like a magnet pulling me in. The face I had seen before, in fleeting glimpses, but never in full view, was coming into focus. My breath caught in my throat as the features became clear, sharp and undeniable. The figure's face was unlike anything I had ever seen. It was pitch black, like it had been carved from coal. The skin was smooth, shiny in places, but rough in others, jagged and uneven, like it had been scraped away by some invisible hand. Its eyes were glowing, an unnatural, almost feline yellow. Wide and unblinking, the pupils were slits, like those of a predator, cold and calculating. But it wasn't the eyes that made my stomach churn. It was the smile. There was no warmth in it, no humanity. Only a jagged, cruel grin that stretched across the figure's face, sharp as a blade and wide as the ocean. It looked like it was made of nightmares, a twisted mockery of something that had never been alive, never been human. I wanted to look away. I tried to close my eyes, but my body wouldn't obey. I was trapped. The figure's gaze held me in place, its presence suffocating, like it was feeding off my fear, growing stronger with every passing second. Why, I whispered, my voice barely audible over the sound of the water. Why are you doing this? The figure didn't answer. It didn't have to. It was never about words. It was about presence, about the weight of inevitability, the crushing knowledge that no matter what I did, I couldn't escape this. The water rose higher. My feet were completely submerged now, the cold seeping into my bones. It was inescapable. The walls seemed to be closing in, the edges of the room disappearing into the abyss, until all I could see was the figure, its smile stretching wider, its eyes never leaving mine. It reached out slowly. Deliberately, it moved its hand through the water, gliding toward me with unnatural grace. I could hear it, the soft sound of water moving against skin like fingers trailing along the surface. I couldn't move. I couldn't stop it. Then, just as the figure's hand hovered inches from my face, I saw it. The faintest shimmer, just beyond the figure's reach. Something was floating in the water, a shape. Something familiar. It was a memory. My heart skipped a beat as I recognized it. It was the small, cracked toy boat I had been holding the day I nearly drowned, the one I had lost in the lake, the one that had slipped from my hands just before the water closed over me. The figure reached for it, and that's when it hit me. The figure wasn't just a shadow. It wasn't just a watcher. It was tied to my past, to my trauma, to that day in the lake. It had always been there, always waiting, not just to haunt me, but to drown me in the same way. It wasn't a figure of darkness. It was a reminder that fate is inevitable. The water was up to my neck, now rising faster with each second, and I could feel the weight of the figure's hand closing in on me. I had no air left, no strength, only the pull of the darkness of the inevitable. And then, just as the water reached my chin, just as I felt the cold touch of the figure on my face, the words echoed in my mind louder than ever before. You can't fight fate. And for the first time in years, I understood. I understood that I had never been meant to escape. It wasn't just the figure I was fighting. It was myself, my fear, my past. And now, the water claimed me. Story 7, Ghosts of the Mountain. I woke up to the sound of the wind howling outside the log cabin, a deep, ominous growl that scraped against the walls like the claws of some unseen creature. The air was heavy with the promise of a storm, thick with the kind of cold that clung to your bones and made you feel like you were being swallowed by the earth itself. A storm in Maine was nothing new to me, but something about this one felt different, like it had a mind of its own. Something darker than usual. Madeline had been bustling around the house preparing for the worst. My grandmother, though she tried to put on a brave face, had the look of someone who had seen too many winters come and go. Her movements were stiff, as if the weight of the years had finally begun to take its toll. She was setting things in place, making sure we were ready for the snowstorm, though in the back of her mind, I could tell she wasn't as sure as she liked to pretend. She always tried to keep things calm, tried to pretend that it wasn't just us now that Jim hadn't been gone for 4 years. Sometimes I still expected to hear his heavy boots clumping down the hall, the sound of his gruff voice filling the space. But he was gone, and we were left with memories, the sharp sting of his absence, like a constant ache in my chest. Madeline caught me staring out the window, lost in thought, and sighed deeply. "You need to run those errands, Piper," she said, her voice rough with exhaustion. "Before the roads get too bad." I nodded, even though I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do in town. We didn't need much, but she always insisted on these little routines, as if they could hold back the dark. I grabbed my jacket, feeling its heavy weight against my shoulders, the familiar scent of leather and dust clinging to the fabric. I didn't mind the cold. In fact, I welcomed it. The chill felt like a reminder that I was alive, that I was still fighting. The truck rumbled to life as I backed it out of the drive, the tires crunching on the gravel as I turned toward the road. The wind was picking up, swirling the snow in sheets across the path ahead. It was just beginning, but already I could tell it was going to be a bad one. The kind of storm that made everything outside seem like a blur, a white void that threatened to swallow you whole. The town wasn't far, but it felt like the world had narrowed down to the stretch of road ahead of me, the forest on either side closing in like it was watching, waiting. A sense of unease crawled along my spine, the hairs on the back of my neck rising. I had no reason to be afraid, but something gnawed at me, a feeling I couldn't shake. I wasn't alone on the road. Even in the middle of nowhere, people had their routines, and I passed a couple of vehicles, a beat-up sedan, an old truck, nothing out of the ordinary. But as I approached the intersection, near the edge of town, the hairs on the back of my neck prickled again. The street lights flickered as if the power was going in and out, and there was something wrong about the way the shadows seemed to stretch too long, too thin. A group of birds flew overhead, screeching in frantic circles. I tightened my grip on the wheel. Then a loud thump echoed in the distance, a sharp, unnatural sound that didn't belong to the storm. It felt like it vibrated deep inside me, stirring a primal fear I didn't know I had. I slowed, squinting through the snow, trying to make sense of the darkness. Nothing? No car. No sign of what had caused the noise. Shaking my head, I dismissed it as my mind playing tricks, the storm messing with my senses. I pressed on my heart, pounding in my chest now faster than I wanted it to. The store wasn't far, just a quick stop to grab supplies. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. When I pulled into the parking lot, the sound of the truck's engine dying felt like a relief, a break from the tension in my chest. I stepped out, the cold air biting at my face, stinging my cheeks and nose. The snow was falling heavier now, the world around me muted, softened by the layers of white. Inside the store, the low hum of fluorescent lights was the only sound, and even that felt hollow. I grabbed what I needed and checked out quickly, eager to get back to the cabin. The clerk gave me a strange smile, eyes darting nervously toward the windows, as if he too felt the storm's strange pull. "Looks like it's gonna be a bad one," he said, his voice thin. I nodded, trying not to think about how his words made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It was just a storm. That's all it was. Right, by the time I made it back to the truck, the wind had picked up again, cutting through the layers of my clothing, biting into my skin. I threw the supplies into the bed of the truck and climbed in, slamming the door shut behind me. As I started the engine, the same feeling of unease crawled over me again, only stronger this time. It was like something was following me, just out of sight, watching, waiting. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something, someone there, nothing. But the chill didn't go away. It clung to me, made the ride back feel longer than it should have been. When I finally pulled up to the cabin, I saw the shadow of my grandmother's figure in the window. But there was something strange about the way she stood there staring out at me. It wasn't like her usual watchful gaze. It was different. Empty almost. I grabbed the bags from the back of the truck and walked toward the door. But as I got closer, the wind howled louder, almost deafening. And then I heard it. A loud bang, something large hitting the side of the house. My heart skipped a beat. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The storm had taken a turn. The wind was no longer just a howling monster. It was a force of nature, knocking at the door. I knocked, trying to force the panic away. "Grandma?" I called out, my voice trembling. But there was no response. I knocked again, harder this time, my fist connecting with the wood. Nothing. Suddenly the door opened, and there she stood, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. "Piper," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. "Something's out there." The snowstorm was now a relentless beast, clawing its way through the woods and up the side of the mountain with an unforgiving rage. Every gust of wind made the cabin creak, and the howl outside was so constant, so loud, that it almost seemed like the world itself was screaming. The night was pressing down on me, heavy and suffocating. It wasn't the cold that was troubling, but the strange sense of isolation that clung to me like a second skin. I hadn't seen my grandmother since she left earlier that morning. The roads had become impassable, and she'd promised to stay with the neighbors, but I hadn't heard from her since. I tried to ignore the creeping unease and busied myself with mundane tasks, organizing the kitchen, checking the fireplace, making sure the windows were secure. But the feeling of being watched never left lingering just beyond the periphery of my vision. A shadow that wouldn't go away. The lights flickered. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. It wasn't a power surge. It was more like the light was fading, like it was being sucked into the storm outside, leaving the cabin to sink into a suffocating darkness. The flicker came again, this time longer, as if mocking me, daring me to acknowledge the creeping dread Building in the air, I stepped toward the window, my breath fogging up the glass. I couldn't see much. The storm had thickened so much that even the large looming trees outside were barely visible, but I thought I saw something, a movement. No, it was nothing. But as I turned away, my mind refused to let it go. My father's old teachings ran through my head like an echo in a dark hallway. His voice coming back to me with startling clarity. Trust your instincts, Piper. Never ignore the gut feeling that something's wrong. I grabbed the shotgun from its place by the door and checked the ammo as I had been taught. I moved through the cabin, the weight of the gun solid in my hands. My senses heightened. The storm outside seemed to press against the walls, trying to get in as if it were a living thing, its tendrils reaching through every crack and crevice. Another bang. This time it was louder, the sound of something heavy slamming into the side of the cabin. I held my breath. It wasn't the wind. Not this time. Slowly, I approached the door, trying to remain as silent as possible. Every movement felt like an eternity. The tension thick in the air, I reached for the knob, my heart racing. But before I could open it, I heard the unmistakable sound of scraping. Something was dragging itself along the ground just outside the door. I exhaled sharply. I had to stay calm. Think, focus, control. Then a low, almost guttural noise came from the other side of the door. Not like anything I had ever heard before. It was almost a growl, a hum, a sound that seemed to vibrate right through my bones. What the hell was that? I spun around, my eyes scanning the room, searching for anything that could explain the sensation of cold dread crawling up my spine. Nothing, just the flickering lights and the heavy silence of the storm. My thoughts started to spin. The storm had grown too intense, too quickly, the wind howling like a chorus of voices. And the strange scraping sound, was it from an animal or something else, something far more dangerous? The knocking sound came again, but this time it wasn't on the door. It was louder, closer. It felt as if it were right next to me. I spun my hand, tightening on the gun, my mind racing with possibilities. But nothing could have prepared me for what I saw when I turned to the kitchen window. A shadow, a shape moving in the darkness just outside the reach of the porch light. It was too large, too unnatural to be a person. It moved in jerky, unnatural motions, almost like a puppet on strings, its limbs twitching in an unsettling way. I pressed my back to the wall, trying to steady my breathing. Every part of me wanted to run, to scream, but my feet felt glued to the floor. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the shadow moving closer. Think, what would Dad do? I stepped quietly toward the door, my hands still clutching the Desert Eagle, fingers stiff with cold. My mind raced through the drills. He had taught me the steps to survive, the rules to follow when the situation went sideways, but none of it had prepared me for what I was facing. There was a sudden sickening silence. No wind, no scraping, no noise at all. I waited. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, pounding like a war drum. And then, without warning, the silence was shattered by a loud bang, so violent it rattled the windows. The shadow was gone, but the noise was still there, echoing in the night. Something had fallen, something heavy. I lunged for the door, throwing it open, my mind screaming at me to move, to do something. But what I saw froze me in my tracks. A ship. Not a car, not a plane. A ship. The shape was massive, metallic and dark, like something from a nightmare, glinting in the dim light of the porch. It hovered just a few feet off the ground, silent yet menacing in its stillness. I could barely breathe as I took a step back. It was real, it was right there. And something or someone had stepped out of it. The figure was short, unnaturally thin, with greyish skin stretched tight over its bones. It wasn't human. I couldn't tell if it was even alive the way it moved, or didn't move like it was caught between two worlds. The creature paused in front of me, its large black eyes fixed on mine. I froze, not knowing if I should fight or run, too paralyzed by fear to do either. And then it spoke. Or rather, I heard a voice in my head, a calm and eerie tone that sent a chill crawling down my spine. "We're not here to harm you." I couldn't respond, couldn't even form a coherent thought. My hand was shaking on the grip of the gun, but I wasn't sure if I could bring myself to pull the trigger. The voice in my head was so unnervingly calm, too calm. It was like the creature knew everything about me, knew my every fear and hesitation. "You're not alone, Piper. You never have been." Suddenly the wind picked up again, howling like a banshee, and the creature stepped forward closer. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, my grip tightened, and my finger hovered over the trigger. I didn't know what I was supposed to do. The storm had become something else, a living thing tearing at the world around me, and I was standing on the edge, caught between two realities. The one I knew and the one I didn't understand. I had to decide. And as I stared at the creature, my father's voice echoed once again in my mind. "Trust yourself, Piper, and never let fear dictate your actions." I steadied my breath, centered myself. Whatever this was, whatever was happening, I wasn't going to back down. Not this time. I raised the gun and fired. When the shot rang out, everything seemed to stop. The creature in front of me staggered its body, jerking as the bullet ripped through the air, striking its chest with a sickening thud. It crumpled to the ground, its thin limbs twitching violently before going still. My heart was racing, my hands trembling so badly I could barely keep the gun in my grip. I stared at the body, my mind struggling to comprehend what had just happened. I had killed it. I had actually killed it, but why? What was it? And why had it come here? I stood frozen for a moment, staring at the creature, as the storm continued to howl outside, now feeling more like a distant hum in my ears than the terrifying roar it had been only moments ago. The world outside seemed to be slipping back into something familiar again, but everything had changed. Everything had. I could hear my father's voice again, clear and steady, like he was standing beside me. "You did good, Piper. You're ready." I didn't know if it was just the shock messing with my mind, or if it was really him, his spirit, his essence, whatever. But that voice gave me a sense of purpose, like it was reassuring me that I wasn't alone, that I could handle whatever came next. It felt like the final lesson. He had left me, though I wasn't sure if I was ready for what it meant. The figure that had been standing beside the creature, a shadow of a man barely visible in the storm's dim light, stepped forward. I immediately knew who it was. Though my mind screamed that I had to be imagining things, it was him, my father Jim. I dropped the gun. The weight of it, suddenly too much to bear. My knees gave out, and I sank to the floor, the world spinning around me. But the figure, the man I thought I'd never see, again was still standing there, his outline flickering in the storm's glow. He didn't seem to be moving, not really, more like he was just there, an apparition, a trick of the light. "Dad?" My voice was barely a whisper. It felt like I was speaking to the wind or to some fragment of my imagination. But the figure nodded. "Piper." He said, his voice like a low rumble that felt more real than any ghost should you did well. You're stronger than I ever gave you credit for. The words didn't make sense. How could he be here? How could he be speaking to me like this? He was dead. I had watched him die, felt the earth tremble beneath my feet as they lowered his casket into the ground. There was no way he could be standing here, now in the middle of a snowstorm outside our cabin, with strange creatures from who knew where, lying dead in front of me. I don't understand. My voice cracked as I spoke. What's happening? Why are you here? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped closer. The cold night air swirling around us, as if the world itself was holding its breath. He reached out a hand, not to touch me, but to point toward the wreckage, toward the alien ship that was still hovering just outside, its lights blinking dimly in the storm's chaotic embrace. It's not over, he said, his tone serious. What's out there isn't just here for you, it's here for all of us. You're part of something bigger than, Piper. I only taught you half of what you need. There's more you haven't been prepared for. My head spun. Half of what I needed. What was he talking about? What was this? Was this some kind of test? Or was I losing my mind before I could ask any more questions? The ground shook again. A low rumbling sound filled the air louder, this time almost deafening. I stumbled, grabbing the door frame for support, my heart hammering in my chest. And then the voice came again. They're coming. I whipped my head around, but the figure of my father was gone. The storm was still there, but he was no longer standing in front of me. The cold, biting wind filled the space where he had been, but the voice lingered, echoing in my head. Dad, I shouted, desperate for an answer, but only silence greeted me. I turned back toward the wreckage, to the alien ship still looming outside. The wind had stopped, almost as if it had been stilled by some unseen force, leaving only the eerie quiet. It was then that I noticed something. There were other figures emerging from the ship. At first, I thought they were more of the creatures I had killed. But as they came closer, I saw that they were different, taller, more humanoid. Their faces were obscured by dark hoods and masks, and they moved with purpose, with a coordination that felt too deliberate, too calculated. I could sense that they weren't here to communicate. They weren't interested in making friends. I stepped back, my hand shaking as I reached for the shotgun again, but it was gone. I'd left it inside. The figures stopped at the edge of the porch, their movements almost synchronized as they turned their heads toward me, their masked faces unreadable. One of them raised a hand, gesturing for me to step forward, but I wasn't about to do that. I didn't know who or what these beings were, but I wasn't about to trust them. I hadn't survived this long by playing the victim, and I sure as hell wasn't about to start now. I grabbed the Desert Eagle once more, feeling the weight of it in my hand, the cold steel reassuring against the chaos swirling around me. I wasn't alone. I could feel my father's presence even if I couldn't see him. He was still with me, guiding me. Stay back, I shouted, aiming the gun toward them. They didn't flinch, didn't even blink. We do not seek violence. The words were clear, not spoken aloud, but rather implanted directly into my mind, as if they were inside me. My head spun again, a tight knot forming in my stomach. We are not your enemies. Something about the way they spoke made me uneasy. It was as if they knew too much, as if they had been watching us long before tonight, long before the storm had started, long before I had heard my father's voice. Who are you? I demanded, my voice steady. despite the fear crawling under my skin. "We are watchers," the voice in my head responded. "We have observed your world, and now we need your help." I swallowed hard, struggling to keep my composure. Help from me? I was just a girl, a teenager, barely able to keep it together after losing my father. I had no idea how to help these creatures or whatever they were. "I can't help you," I whispered, my throat tight. "I don't even know what you are." One of the figures took a step closer, and I instinctively lifted the gun higher, my finger brushing the trigger. "Not yet." The voice responded, more insistent now. "But you will." And just like that, they turned away, their movements smooth and almost graceful, as if they had never even been a threat to begin with. They walked back toward the ship, disappearing into the darkness beyond the porch, leaving me alone once again. The storm resumed with a deafening fury, its roar filling the space where they had been standing. And I realized in that moment that the true horror was only just beginning. I had no idea what was coming next, but I could feel it deep in my bones. Something dark was looming on the horizon, and I was at the center of it. And the question that haunted me now was whether I could survive it.